Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to the latest episode of the Hard Compound Live. Firstly, my apologies for the slightly late start. My technical hitch here, but we are all set. My name's Rich, and I run and operate the Hard Compound. We're a one-stop shop for all things motorsport, and we can be found mainly on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So search for the Hard Compound on any of those platforms. Come in and join the fun. We'd love to have you on board. We're here to share a love of motorsport. That's all, and we cover all kinds of motorsport from F1 to GT racing to touring cars, rallying, bikes, NASCAR, and anything that we can shake a stick at, really. We do this by putting out 3 written articles every day, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, at about 9 o'clock in the morning in the UK here, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and about 8 p.m. at night. We do race reviews, race previews, throwbacks, breaking news, any liveries, and anything else that we like to shake a stick at, really. So do come along, join the fun. In case you hadn't noticed, we also do live video interviews, just like this one, and just like this one, these go out on our Facebook, our Twitter, and our YouTube channels. So you can find us on YouTube and give us a follow as well. They're automatic in the live section on YouTube. It's for you to watch back, and they are immediately available after we've finished the recording. I won't go into all the guests we've had. This is number 175, I think, like that. We've had everyone from Mario Andretti and Jackie Ickx and Chip Ganassi and Jackie Oliver through the British touring car grid, past and present. We've had like world rally champions. We've had a lot of people that have raced in Formula One, IndyCar winners, Daytona 24-hour winners, 12 hours of Sebring winners. We've had winners of the Petit Le Mans. I've had single-seater champions, so do go and check those out. But don't do it just yet, because all those series that I've mentioned, our guest tonight has done them all. Absolute legend of British motorsport and in the GT racing world. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring him in. Please join me in extending a very, very warm welcome to Mr. Oliver Gavin.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very well, Oliver. How are you?
Yeah, good, Rich. Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, excellent.
Good.
Yeah.
Bit of a ramble there, but yeah.
No. All good. All good.
But
excellent.
Yes, we've got our little we've got our little technical glitch out the way, and we are all good to go.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was some access problems I was having, but yeah, I think we got on top of it now. So, yep, we can crack on.
We certainly have, and there was a little bit at this end as well before we went live, but we're all good. We're all working.
Yeah, we're all still alive. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Firstly, thanks very much for coming on and having a chat. Obviously, I've been wanting to get you on here for a while. It was one of your rivals who actually mentioned I should contact you, if you remember.
Oh, right, yeah.
His name might crop up later on, we'll see. But sure. I appreciate you coming on, because you've just come back from Daytona, haven't you?
Yeah, just got back from Daytona and just had a very full-on 10 days there with doing numerous different things, whether it was management stuff with different drivers, the likes of Trent Hinman and Colin Braun, as well as an old teammate of mine, John Field, which goes back to, we may well talk about him at some point this evening. And then my business partner, Matt Bell, was also competing for AWA in their Corvette Z06 GT3R. And they ended up winning the GTD class. So they'd had a phenomenal 10 days, including the Raw, throughout the time there at the Daytona 24 hours. And super confident throughout the time that they were there on track. The whole AWA team were, and all of Matt's teammates, whether it was Lars Kern or Ore Fidani or Marvin Kirchhoffer, they all did a brilliant job, and the team are great, and the likes of Jeff Braun Engineering and Charlie Ping as well. But Andrew, who is the boss there at AWA, I think he was holding it all together. So yeah, very, very pleased for all of them. Excellent results, and that's the first customer car win for Corvette in IMSA. So yes, the factory team has kind of won races in pro, but I think that was the first customer win in IMSA. So yeah, delighted that was sort of chalked off, and I'm sure everybody at Chevy and at GM Motorsport are delighted.
Yeah, absolutely. And they should absolutely be.
Yeah.
that's a terrific achievement, and just a my 2 penny thing, just as a fans thing from the outside. The car looked fantastic as well, didn't it?
Yeah, it was one of my favourite liveries. You know, it looked a little bit throwback to sort of that sort of John Player special, sort of JPS Lotus sort of look and feel, and actually just I had a message from Ore Fidani, the owner of the car, yesterday, and he said that that car is now going to stay as it's finished. It's going to be clear coated and put in his workshop, and it will not turn another wheel. It'll be there for everybody to come that goes into his shop will be able to see it there proudly on display. Brilliant. He's gonna just so he's bought another car. So in winning the race, Corvette have managed to sell another car, so that's great.
Happy days for everyone, and and it's gone out with a bang, clearly. Which is always lovely. No, great stuff.
Very good.
Just quickly before we get into everything, so I'll say hello to everyone in the comments section. Looks as though all the platforms are working, which is lovely. Our good friend Nikki from over in Adenau near the Nürburgring. Good evening, mate. Bob from Go Bobby UK, Keith Mayle, Tash Stratton, John Kane. Everyone, thank you very much for tuning in. There's loads of you already, which is lovely. If you have any comments or questions, do put them in. We'll see them in real time or within a very short delay, and we'll try and work them in. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, right. Deep breath. We've covered the present and what's happened this weekend. It was a fantastic event, and worthy winners across the board, as we've said.
Yeah.
I'd like to sort of turn it back on you now, if I may, and start right at the very start. Where did your interest and kind of love of motorsport stem from?
Well, it sort of goes back to my father, as it usually sort of does. It's a family sort of link, and my father and my grandfather. We don't live too far from the town of Bedford, and that's where my sort of family sort of grew up. And my grandfather had a couple of garages in Bedford, and so his love for the automotive and vehicles and sort of performance vehicles was sort of there from a very, very early age. And my father loved everything sort of mechanical. He's very good with his hands, like his father was. And my father got into a business with 5 other gentlemen, and they started building sort of rather large machinery that worked in the printing and packaging industry. So they slit and rewound paper, film, anything you could put on a roll. And so my father was busy building that business up, and my brother and I, Marcus, my brother, and my father's Michael, my brother and I were sort of growing up, coming up through school, and my dad was away and trying to find stuff to do with my brother and I when we were when he was back from work or from traveling, and so he sort of thought, well, let's see if we can get into karting. Someone else in the village was already into karting, and so they took us along, and we had a crack at karting in that friend's kart, and loved it ever since. And we're fortunate enough that Dad could buy us a kart between all 3 of us. We drove that around the car park at Dad's factory for a bit, and then we decided, well, we'd better start getting some kit and a van and some kart for my brother and I both to race. And we were very sort of basic to start with. And you might be able to see this picture just behind me here. That's actually of me back in the day when I was only about 11 or 12 years old, driving in junior, I think it was called Junior Booster then. And that was at Kimbolton. And then sort of graduated from that into Junior Britain, and then into, I don't know, 100 National, I think it was called. And then we were doing 100 Super, I think it was called. And it was an amazing childhood, fantastic to race all around the United Kingdom. Did get a chance to race on the continent a couple of times, France and Italy for World Championships. It was a brilliant way to sort of spend time with my brother and also my father, and sort of cut my teeth in racing.
And it sounds like the perfect way to do it. Obviously with family as well, and being able to have your own car obviously helps as well. Because
I was extremely lucky, that we'd at that time it was far more affordable, I think, than it currently is. I think it has got really mightily expensive now. And we really were to start with. We were starting it off with the cart on the roof rack, driving to the track. It was the all of the tools in the boot of the car, and you're getting changed in the back seat and all of that sort of stuff. Then we did graduate onto a van, but even then, the setups that are there at the kart track now are just extraordinary. I wouldn't recognize it, to be perfectly honest. And I think back in the day, the likes of David Coulthard or others like that had something. I think a guy called Graham Melville, who also had a really big setup, and but that was nothing articulated. It was just like a big van, and they might have like 2 or 3 carts. Well, I had a cart and maybe a couple of engines, and that was it. It was amazing times growing up, and I learnt an awful lot. Around at that time, there was drivers were sort of coming through. Dan Weldon was one of those, the late and great Dan Weldon, who I was in and around quite a lot in the paddock. He was just a couple of years younger than me, so he was always in the sort of like age group one below. But yeah, he was clearly a star, and then he went on to sort of back that up with all the victories that he had in IndyCar and the Indy 500 wins, and just an extraordinary career that he had. But then I raced in and around Dario Franchitti for a long time, and Marino, his brother, and Paul di Resta. You got to know the characters and the people in and around. David Coulthard was there as well, and it was great times. Really sort of fantastic memories.
Absolutely. And obviously at the time they were just people that you were racing against, and you knew they were good. Obviously they've come on to be household names now.
I think David always had that sort of not air about him, but he had something about him that sort of, he seemed to be on a path, and he was supremely confident, and you could always sort of see that once he got into cars that he was going to make a very good go of it. Dario at the time, I wouldn't have said so, but since then, as soon as Dario got past sort of Formula 3 and into sort of DTM and ITC, he's just flown. And, I've had the pleasure to work with Dario since we've both kind of retired, and a brilliant guy, just such a genuine chap, really a massive passion for the sport, and someone that's brilliant to have a beer with, and just sort of chat and shoot the breeze on whatever's going on within the sport at the time, at that moment. But yeah, he's clearly done brilliantly for himself, and fantastic for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's one of the guys that I think British motorsport needs to acknowledge a bit, because what he's gone and done, has been absolutely incredible. And I've actually pinged him a couple of messages about coming on here, but I'm not sure if it's his cup of tea. But
I don't know. Keep going. You never know. And I can give you a bit of a push, bit of a recommendation. But yeah, Dario's a good guy, and someone that is certainly a still a huge part of the sport, and wants to stay that way. So.
Yeah, because he works quite a lot with a very famous chap from the UK who does a lot of very good engine design and car design, which
exactly,
people are very aware of. But I just love hearing these early insights from these guys who have gone on and have done so well for themselves, and as have you, of course. What I do like to ask you is your first competitive race. Do you remember how you felt? Were you automatically just kind of super competitive, or was there nerves, or was it just a case of let's go and have some fun?
I think it was a little bit of let's just go and have some fun. I don't think I was too nervous. At that time, 11 years old, you really don't have the sort of registration of fear or what's going to be the consequence if you come flying out this cart at sort of 70 miles an hour. You just want to go faster and faster and faster. And you explore the limits. You try and sort of understand, okay, what are the reasons why certain things are happening? Why am I ending up over here? I want to be over there. I'm turning the wheel this way, but the car's going straight, or I'm turning the wheel and then it starts to go sort of turn around on you. So you're you're trying to figure all that sort of stuff out, and you start to get a very raw sort of feel and attachment to the machine. And I think if I had to try and put my finger on it, that's kind of what I just ultimately love. And it's hard to sort of make it any more sort of simple than that, really. It's that sort of interaction you get sort of between man and machine when you're driving a car on the limit, on a racetrack and at speed. And karting gives you some of that very rawest moments. You can go up and down the spectrum of different things, whether it's a kart that's just behind me here, or even a Formula One car that's just up here, or you get a certain amount of different sensation and a different sort of feel to things. But ultimately, that feedback you get through your backside, or your back, or your hands, or your feet, or your head, or where you're looking, the bumps that you're feeling through the steering wheel, or in through your vision, or even the smells that you're smelling, and the sort of the other sort of hearing of certain things. It's all these sensations that you're pulling on to build the picture in your own head on how you should go racing.
I just love that, how it what's the word? It kind of like transcends all kinds of racing, doesn't it? For, as you say, from karting right all the way up to whatever you consider to be the very top. There's that kind of that visceral kind of feel.
And that's ultimately when somebody goes on a track day, or whenever somebody goes to the kart track, or when somebody goes to race their car at Brands Hatch at a just a club event, and it's a Formula Ford car, the actual sensation that you get when you first click it into gear and you pull it out the pit lane, and then you send it into Paddock Hill Bend for the first time, you're like, wow, this is remarkable. This is just absolutely something that gets all the hair standing up the back of your neck, and you're sort of thinking, this is what racing's all about. You are alone, somewhat, in that little bubble that you've got around your car, and that you're driving the car somewhat on the limit and feeling how it works, and what happens if you just touch that little bit of apex curb or the exit curb as you come up onto that, or you're going up the hill into Druids, and how the car brakes as you're going up the hill, and then you're turning the car into the corner, and you're touching a bit of curb or not, and the tires are starting to get warmer, so the car's sliding a little bit less, and all those sorts of things that you go through as you've just driven out the car, and that's just half a lap. And you're picking up all of those things, whether you're going up through the gears, and you listen to the RPM, and when are you shifting, where are you shifting, where are you looking, how's it going, how's the steering wheel feel in your hand, all of those things. It's just you are taking in a million different things from all of these inputs and trying to piece it all together. And that, to me, is what racing is all about.
Yeah, absolutely right. And again, it's great to hear the insight from a driver's point of view. And what I do love is that you've mentioned Brands Hatch, because pretty much everyone I've ever spoken to on here, wherever they're from in the world, mentions Brands Hatch and Paddock Hill Bend, and what a way to start a lap type thing. So
yeah, it is. It's certainly, in my opinion, it's right up there with one of the best tracks in the world, and it's so unique in its layout format. The gradients and what you've got, the challenges, and how it all works, and it's got so much to offer. It's a phenomenal track. I really love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I must admit, it's kind of one of my favorites as well. Probably it's the first one I went to as well, back in '86, and fantastic circuit. And our friend Tash, who's just commented on Facebook, she said she's been there and done that with racing her car at Brands Hatch.
Oh, brilliant!
Obviously agrees as well. Fantastic tarmac. We love it, and it hasn't changed too much either, which is good.
No, it hasn't.
I mean, obviously, you've gone through karting, progressed, and you've won some championships at like Kim Bolton, things like that. Where did you start looking at moving into cars, and how did it come about? Because obviously there's a financial aspect, isn't there?
Yeah.
To going into cars.
Yeah. So from karting, I'd done some bits and pieces, done some international stuff, and I'd raced against a couple of guys internationally that I ended up racing with again, significant, decades later, in cars. But it was really around 1990, 89, 90 that it's really sort of towards the end of my school years that looked to move into cars. And it was a Formula First Winter Series at Brands Hatch. That was my very first car race, and it was typical sort of end of the year, sort of October, November weather. It was very miserable, very dark. I think there was even snow on the side of the racetrack as I sort of put it in first gear and pulled out the pit lane for the first time. And it was very, very wet. I think I got called up to the steward's office. It's certainly from that first practice session, because I was passing too many cars under yellow flags and I just wasn't seeing them. And I was so I got a big old slap on the wrist for that. And then I think actually even in qualifying, I got my best time disallowed because I passed somebody under yellow flags, and I was just rather tunnel vision, I think. So and then the first race, I think I finished sort of like 6th or 7th, and then the second race I think I won. And it was brilliant. Formula First was pretty cost effective, but this was still fundamentally all still being paid for by a little bit of family money. And we were working hard to try and find sponsorship. We were working hard to try and get pieces together. And then I started to get some little bits and pieces sort of through the end of that winter series. And we got enough money together to do Formula First in 1991 for a full season. And the team I'd driven for in Formula First Winter Series at Brands Hatch, I think it was named was Team Tarraco, but that was run by a chap called Graham Glue and his son Phil Glue. Yeah, he's very much in the sport. He manages drivers now, and he's doing a fantastic job at that. And he's a great guy. I love Phil. He's fantastic. But Graham, his father, was the chap that sort of got me connected with Fortec, and Fortec were the team that I drove for in 1991. And we did a bit of testing beforehand, and it was going pretty well. And then we got to the first race and won that one, and then won the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one, and ended up winning 11 of the 12 races that I did. The one that I didn't win was Brands Hatch. It seems to be quite a Brands Hatch theme here. And it was on the Indy circuit, and I was on pole position, and I stalled on the line and dropped right to, I don't know, nearly all the way to the back, got going. It's coming back through the field, and it was tricky because it was big field, in and out, in and out, in and out. And I got up to my teammate, Glenn Tabor was his name. Lovely guy, really lovely guy. But Glenn was like determined to make it quite difficult for me to get by him. And well, I tried to pass him into clearways, and I didn't really do a great job of it. And we ended up crashing into one another. I broke my front suspension. I broke my rear suspension. He broke his front suspension, and we were both out. And so I had to trudge back to the pits with a sort of helmet in hand, and a rather angry Glenn telling me that I'd done something rather bad, rather wrong, and it was my fault. So I had to take that one on the chin, and but the next race or the race after, I think I ended up winning the championship, and so it was great. I love Formula First. There were so many great characters in it. The Redgraves are a fantastic family. Mark and Claire Redgrave were both racing and competing in the championship that year, and Mark was like my main competition. He was like the guy that was always there, right on me. There was a couple of others, but really Mark was always there. And they were run by his father, Richard, and Richard was this really larger than life character, super chap, just the biggest heart, and he always wanted to help people out. He was always that sort of that character that was in and around the paddock, and it was massively competitive. But if somebody needed something, he would be one of the first there to offer it. So they're a great family. I got to know them a little bit better, and it was great to race and compete against them. But as that sort of finished, and I'd won the championship, I then thought, okay, we need to move on to other things, and Graham was still helping me, Graham Glue, and we were looking, okay, where else could I go? So we looked with David Sears, Vauxhall Lotus, and as well as some Formula Renault. Formula Renault I did with Fortec, because they were running a Formula Renault team, and so I did a couple of races. I think it was one at Snetterton. I think I qualified on pole, and there was a massive battle, I think, between Jason Plato and Bobby Verdon Rowe. They were the two who were really fighting it out, and I think they got a little bit sort of surprised when I turned up there and I put it on pole at Snetterton. Again, the start wasn't great, and I dropped back, and those guys battled it out and dropped me, and I was finished quite a way back.
Nice.
But then the Vauxhall Lotus stuff, that was good. That was with David Sears, and I think I finished second in one of those races. But it was really my first time in slicks and wings and all of that sort of stuff. So that was kind of a big point for me.
I mean, I sort of leads me on to what I was going to ask next, actually, because obviously, you know, moving from karts into cars. I mean, this comes up quite often. It depends which route you take. Obviously, those who go into the touring car route, junior saloons, and everything like that.
Yeah.
It's possibly a bit more difficult going from a kart to a car because of, you know, the roll and loadings and depth perception, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Single seaters, it seems to be. I've never done it, but single seaters seems to be slightly easier, maybe just because it's a bit more like a go-kart, just a bigger one. But then it's the one from a car like a Formula First into the Formula Renault or Formula Vauxhall or Lotus or whatever it might be, when you've got wings and slicks and downforce to contend with. That seems to be where not the difficulty, but where the challenge comes in, I guess. Did you find that at all?
Yeah, you have to recalibrate a bit, and you have to sort of work with what you've got, you know, the resource that you've got, you know, whether it's how the tire works, you know, how the weight of the vehicle is affecting how you're wanting, where you wanted to place the car, how you wanted to place the car, how the sort of the dynamic of things. And that's, you know, with a kart, it's very direct, very instant. You know, you can almost pick the kart up yourself and sort of wear it on your back. And that's just sort of a bit of a term, but you know, when you're in a car, there's an awful lot more mass, and there's, you know, you're having to sort of think about how the timing of everything and where you place it and how long it can take for it to arc into the corner, and that's sort of, I think, the thing that you really have to start sort of working on is how you're dealing with tire weight, platform power, braking performance, and then how you piece all that together, the flow of it all, and how you everybody has their own driving style. It's a bit like a fingerprint, but you know, you've got to try and put your mark on the way that car drives and works into and through corners or into a series of corners, and then how you learn to set that car up to get the most from it. And that can take some time, and that's kind of what all the junior formulas are for, is for you to start developing as a driver and understanding what it is and what it takes to sort of get the most from it. And sort of Formula First, it seemed to suit me quite a lot. It is kind of odd because the engine's mounted across the car, not in line, and you do sort of feel that quite a lot of the time that you've got this sort of boat anchor behind you, and it's sort of like this pendulum effect.
Right.
Well, kind of like a bit like driving an old 911, I suppose. But I seem to really enjoy it, and Formula First was a lot of fun. And then, you know, it's then trying to sort of switch yourself into the slicks and wings things, whether it's Formula Renault, Vauxhall Lotus, and you know, but it was really actually the end of 1991 that I ended up getting pushed forward for this McLaren Autosport Young Driver of the Year award, and that sort of led to the drive in that McLaren behind me. And you know, that was 2 days at Donington Park. I was there against 5 others, and I think in that 5 it was a guy called Jonathan McGall, Dino Morelli, Dario Franchitti, Oh, I'm now I'm really starting to pull on the. Oh, Guy Smith, I think, was in it.
Oh, yeah.
I think, maybe not. But the 2 days you had physical tests, you had interviews, other bits and pieces, and then of course you were driving cars. You were driving different cars that were up a step up from where you had been. So I ended up driving I think it was an Astra. It was sort of like a school car. And you do some laps in that, and then I think I drove a Vauxhall Lotus, and then I drove a Formula 3 car.
Wow.
And so I'd never really driven one of those before, so that was good, and it all went extremely well, and ended up impressing, and I ended up winning the McLaren Autosport Young Driver of the Year award that year in 1991, and I was extremely lucky to have that trophy presented to me by Ayrton Senna, the late and great Ayrton Senna.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was pretty remarkable to have that. And Murray Walker was there to interview me, and Ron Dennis was up there as well, and Peter Fubister, he was the editor publisher of Autosport. And actually, I think the Autosport Awards is on actually tonight. I think
I
think that
think it is tonight. I've
yeah.
seen across all the socials, people are
Yeah,
saying that.
yeah, I think it's and yeah, so that was an amazing night, something where I'll always remember that. I've got a picture of myself sat in the McLaren with Ayrton Senna on one side and Sir Stirling Moss on the other, and that was definitely a moment I'll always remember. And Ayrton was extraordinary. He was the only person that I ever saw at that event who came in, and his aura and his personality just sort of swept everything else aside. Anything that anybody had a preconceived idea of him, or he had everybody's respect. The whole room, when he got up on stage after they finished sort of clapping and sort of receiving him onto the stage, whenever he spoke, nobody moved and nobody spoke. And that's the only time I've seen that room. It holds 1,000 people. Only time I've ever seen that room completely still and silent.
Hushed, almost.
Yeah, nobody went to the toilet. It was just everybody was listening to every single word he said, and he spoke. And it's this is not his mother tongue. He spoke so eloquently for about 20 minutes about what had happened that season in 1991. And he had this brilliant delivery. He just had everybody sort of captivated and under a spell, and he was so charismatic, such a way about him that he had so much, everybody had so much respect for him. And it was not really, I suppose, until the very next year, in 1992, when Nigel won the World Championship, and he was asked to come to the Autosport Awards, and he did, that Nigel tried to do the same.
Right.
And it didn't quite work.
Yeah, I can imagine having met Nigel. I mean, Nigel's my hero growing up.
Yeah,
I
and
love him.
he's
It's
Lionheart, and he's sort of like this ferociously sort of courageous man behind the wheel, but he just did not have that same ability to hold a crowd and to sort of engage with people. And Ayrton was just extraordinary. I think if he had lived, he would have ended up being the president of Brazil, because he was so loved and adored, and such a marvelous sort of human, really, that he was outside of the car. Once he'd sort of taken his sort of competitive head off, I see, in my opinion, that he would have been a remarkable man to help that country. But sadly, he didn't survive the accident in '94. So
yeah, we all know what happened.
yeah. But that really was my one of my biggest parts of my whole career, really, receiving that award from Ayrton Senna. So really very special.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, we've all seen what Ayrton was like on track from the outside looking in, and people can make up,
Yeah,
have their own opinions, of course.
sure. Emotional. Yeah.
Yeah. But this is one of the joys that I've had of doing these kind of chats is people that have had interactions with Ayrton, and they all say very, very similar things. I mean, just last week I spoke with Marco Apicella,
Mm.
and last 2 years ago I spoke with Alex Caffey, and they both said on the first weekend in Formula One, I mean, they were with, I think Alex was with Osella and Marco was with Jordan, and they just said that the first person to come up with them to say, welcome, congratulations, if there's anything you need, anything like that, was Ayrton. And he just,
Yeah,
he just went out of his way to
he
help
did.
people. And whatever you think of how he went about his racing, it's the human behind it, isn't it? And
Yeah,
obviously what you've said just backs that up once again.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. He was an extraordinary human being.
Yeah, very, very sad. And yeah, we're not going to get into 94 because it's all still very upsetting for everyone, isn't it? But just to sort of back, I mean, you mentioned 1993. You stepped into British F3, obviously, I guess partly on the back of what you'd done. Excuse me, in Formula Vauxhall Lotus and the McLaren Tesla and everything like that. How did the move to Edenbridge come about? Because I remember watching this series, and I think it was the first time that I became aware of you, actually.
Oh, right.
Watching that season.
Right.
I think I went to a couple of rounds that year. I was only 11 or 12, but yeah.
Yeah, so I'd had a good season in '92 with John Village in Vauxhall Lotus, and then we thought, okay, we finished second, I think, in that championship, and we need to move on. And I got a little bit of support from Vauxhall, and the team that was running with Vauxhall engines was Edenbridge Racing,
Right.
and so Peter Briggs, who ran Edenbridge Racing, he sort of got together, with the family and the sponsors that we had, and we put something together. And really, off the back of the performances that Edenbridge had previous couple of seasons, with Gilles de Ferran had been extremely strong in the Edenbridge car, and Peter had said, "Okay, we're going to go to the Rolt chassis, and we're going to run that." And I then got to meet all of the guys there that was going to run with, a guy called Ian Morgan, who was my engineer for both 1993 and 1995 in Formula 3, and I'm still great friends with Ian to this day. And Ian went on to have an amazing career with McLaren, but his real sort of claim to fame is working at Red Bull and being there, sort of leading the technical group and leading the engineers, through all of those years with Seb and Mark and having those years of success with Red Bull. Ian's an amazing engineer and a brilliant guy, and somebody that I'll always sort of count on as a friend in the sport. So he was my engineer, and we did the first couple of races in Formula 3 in the Rolts, and it wasn't really working very well. And there was this Dallara chassis that was being run by Richard Arnold's group and being run by Stephen was driving one car, and Warren Hughes was driving the other. And Warren was kind of like in and around the front, and then I think he won a race. And Peter had been running Warren Hughes the year before, and Peter was like, well, if Warren's winning races and I know what he's like, I think that we should maybe get one of those chassis. And so Peter then took the plunge and decided, okay, we're going to get a Dallara chassis. So we went out to Italy, to the Dallara factory. I jumped in one of the cars, and we got it all going and the seat fit. And then we came back to the next round, and we all of a sudden start, from running sort of 10th or 11th, we were now running second or third. Right at the front, I think that first race I did in it, I think we finished third. Then the next race, I think I won, and all of a sudden we started this great streak of winning races, and it really started to click. And people, different teams were trying to come out with different developments on either their Rolt chassis or their Reynard chassis. The main competition was coming from Dick Bennett's, Mark Goosens and Pedro De La Rosa were in those cars. And then in the Paul Stewart racing cars, it was Kelvin Burt, and who was his teammate? I'm trying to remember who Kelvin Burt's teammate was. And God, it's escaped me now. but they were running Reynards, and so Andy Miller was the sort of like the boss and running the show there at Paul Stewart Racing, and he was trying to sort of understand and figure out, okay, how can they make their cars quicker? And in the end, they all ended up having to go to Dallara chassis because nothing could really compete with it. And it was at that point then, I think my experience, I got a little bit found out in what I could do and how I could set things up and how I could go about sort of crafting a race win. And Kelvin was more experienced, faster, better in the car, understood it better. And he just had that little bit more sort of knowledge of me of the championship. And he ended up winning the championship in the end quite comfortably, and I ended up finishing second. And Kelvin was a deserving winner, and Paul Stewart Racing were. They really did do a great job. So we came up that a little bit short, but first year, and I thought, okay, fine. We'll look to sort of move on. So 94, we didn't want to sort of stay in Formula 3, thought move on to Formula 3000, and that was a pretty big mistake, because Formula 3000 with Amigaland, it was underfunded. They were short of budget. They were a team that was not very experienced. They didn't have a great engineering base, not really. And it was doomed to fail right from the start. And then we also got sort of tied in with Pacific Grand Prix and all the Formula One stuff that they decided to do. And that just turned into this huge sort of snowball and mess, and it wasn't great. And so 1995, we went back to Edenbridge Racing with Peter Briggs, and that was a pressurized year with all kinds of silly things that happened. Me stalling on the grid, some poor performances, overloading myself with pressure, to then wins at places like Thruxton and Donington Park and Snetterton and Pembury. But it was, the pressure was massively on for us, Edenbridge Racing, to come up with a result and to beat Paul Stewart Racing. And actually at the start of the year of 95, Jackie had called me and asked me whether I wanted to go and drive for them. And I said no, I wanted to stay with Edenbridge Racing and Vauxhall and Ian and Peter and all of the guys there. They really felt like family. And so sort of halfway through the year, you start sort of like second guessing yourself, and you're going, have I made the right decision? And all this sort of stuff. Well, it comes down to the final race, and it's at Thruxton, and Helio Castroneves, Ralph Furman, and myself are all tied on points going into the last race at Thruxton.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah. So it was like whoever finished, highest of the three of us, was going to win the championship. And I've spoken to Helio about this, and Ralph actually since that point, and we've all laughed about it, and Helio said, yeah, I just kept crashing way too much that year. And I remember the first time I remember seeing Helio, and it was in my mirrors as he was cartwheeling over the back of my car. And I was thinking, well, that's not obviously going to lead to a very good result. So he was very much a win or bust sort of guy, Helio, at the time.
Sure.
And Ralph had his moments where he was unbelievably fast, unbeatable. But then the next weekend, I don't know, it just didn't. Maybe a little bit like how I was the first year I did Formula 3. You just got a bit lost, and you just couldn't quite string it all together, or the pressure just got a bit too much. Sure. And so we got to that final race, and I finished third, and they finished, I don't know, 6th and 7th or something like that. So we got the championship. We won the championship, and delighted. One of the best days again of my single seater career. And winning the British Formula 3 championship is kind of like puts you on the map, I suppose, when you're looking to make that next step, and if that's to get into Formula 1 or get into some testing in F1. And so that really was sort of like a big moment and a big part of it. But the sort of like the link up with Pacific and the Formula 1 piece that had started in 94 and then sort of culminated in me going to Adelaide at the end of the season in 1995.
I actually read about this. This was with Bernie, wasn't it? And
yeah. So I'd been talking with Pacific. So that was Keith Wiggins and a guy called who's running the team at the time. Who was a team manager. Oh God, his name escapes me. Very, very nice man. Craig. No. Oh God, he's gone from my head.
Yeah.
But I'm on the plane down to Adelaide, and the team had reassured me, you're eligible for a super license. You've won your British Formula 3 Championship. Yeah, that should all be fine. We're going to get you in for a seat fitting. Bertrand Gachot is going to take a sabbatical. He's going to sort of because at that time Adelaide was the final race, and the race before that was in Suzuka. And it was always 2 weeks in between the last two races, and most guys went from Suzuka to somewhere sunny, sort of Malaysia, Philippines, somewhere like that, and sort of had a quiet week. Well, Keith had said, what we're going to say is Bertrand Gachot is going to have a jet ski accident. He's going to break his leg. He's not going to be able to make it, and so you're coming in to fill in as the test driver. Okay, great.
Right.
I get there. I get fitted in the car. I'm in the pit lane. I'm being, in the paddock and in the garages, and being fitted in the car in the garage. And I've had an interview with Murray Walker and all these other journalists, and sort of building up their story on what I've done and bits and pieces and a track walk and all this other stuff. And then I'm doing the last fit in the car, and then all the mechanics leave the garage and everybody disappears, and I'm like still sat in the car, and I'm like, what is going on? And I'm looking in the mirror of the race car, and I can see standing in the back of the garage is Bertrand Gachot and Keith Wiggins. And Keith is looking really shifty and sheepish, and Bertrand's got this massive grin on his face. And so I get out of the car, walk to the back, and I get there, and Keith goes, "Oh, there's been a bit of a problem with your super license, Oliver." And Bertrand's just sitting there, sort of standing there nodding, just going, "Yeah, you're not going to drive this weekend." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Yeah, you can't get your super license. You're out." So, the world starts to sort of crash in a bit, and I'm thinking, this can't be right. And so I think, right, well, I'll just go down and I'll stand at Bernie's office. I knew where Bernie's office was there in the Adelaide paddock. I'll go down there and I'll see him. 2 hours later, I get to see Bernie. And Bernie's sort of like, "Look, Oliver, it's as simple as this." He said, "We can't give you a super license because the office is now closed in Paris, because that's where all the super licenses have to come from." He said, "But I'll just ask you this." He said, "Have you ever driven that car before?" And I hadn't actually driven that car because I'd driven the previous year's car.
Yeah.
And I said, "No." He said, "Have you ever driven any other Formula One car?" And I said, "Well, I drove," he said, "for a decent amount of time." And I said, "No, not really." He said, "Okay. Hey, have you ever driven here before?" I said, "No."
Right.
"And you've never ever raced in anything faster or bigger than a Formula 3000 car?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, Oliver, we'd love to have you back in the World Championship at some point, but Pacific are going out of business. They're definitely done. They're not going to be back next year. You're clearly talented enough," but he said, "We don't want to risk it. Not this weekend." He said, "This race is huge. It's big for us. And we just want you to have your debut in Formula One in a better team, in a better car, in a better situation." He says, "You're not ready. We can't give you a super license, and we can't have you on the grid here." So, and honestly, I couldn't argue with him. What was I going to say?
I was going to say, you probably can't argue with it, can you, with all
No.
the reasoning that he's done there.
And so Bernie said, "No, you're not going to be on the grid." And so that was that. And so I walked out of there really kind of tail between the legs, and I then had to go and pick my father up from the airport, and because my father had flown down overnight to come and see me race and compete. So I picked him up and I said, "Yeah, bad news, Dad. I'm not going to be racing." And so at that point, my dad was pretty upset with Keith and all those guys and how all that turned out, and it was a huge mess. And it's one of those things that you go, okay, it's motorsport, it happens, but yeah, that was pretty ugly. That whole thing was. So, but there is a silver lining in the whole sort of Pacific story and the way it sort of worked, and it goes on to when I started racing in America, and my very sort of first proper break in the United States came through Keith. And Keith Wiggins, he was one of the sales directors. He was the sales director at Lola's, and he got me into a Lola prototype car that I competed in Grand Am and in the ALMS, and that kind of got me on the map there. Drove with John Field, who we spoke about earlier.
Yes.
And so that it's such a small community. You just do not know who is going to be on the up or coming down, and you meet them at some point. So you just never ever know how it's all going to work out.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of door kind of closed, I guess, in Adelaide. But as you say, a few years later, it opened up another.
Yeah, it did. It really did. So that was great.
In the States, which kind of went rather well, which we'll come to shortly.
Yeah, right.
So
this is going on a little bit here. We're about an hour in here, and we've not even finished single seaters. It's like blimey.
That's right. We can wrap through. I mean, honestly, we've had some of these that have gone on for ages. It's
days, blimey.
Well, I mean, maybe not days, but yeah. I mean, we've had over 4 hours once, but we're not going to aim for that. Don't worry.
Blimey. Gee, I need a drink.
Just quickly, I mean, we mentioned about obviously you said about what happened with Pacific, and it's a shame that didn't happen, of course. It's probably a good time to talk about F1 cars and machinery and stuff, because as you said, you've gone through Formula first. You did the Formula Ford Festival, I believe.
Yeah.
Formula 3, F3000, and we're coming up to F1. So there's a kind of a chain of like progression there. I mean, you did some testing for Pacific, as you said.
Yeah.
97, 98 was it? 97, 98 you did with Benetton in the B197 and the 198.
Yeah.
Those of us who were around at that time will know that was a heck of a car.
It was mighty.
Was with Gerhard and Jean Lacey, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Jean Lacey, I think, were there as well. Just, I mean, how did that test come about, and what did you think of that car? Because with all due respect to Pacific, I think it was probably a bit of a different beast.
Well, just to finish on the Pacific story, I did drive the Pacific in 1994 at Snetterton for 10 laps in the rain, but it had Formula 3000 suspension on the left and Formula 1 suspension on the right. The car was so late to be finished that they were desperate to sort of roll it out, and they said, "Okay, Oliver, you can have your 10 laps. Here you go." But it was set up that way. Even the gear shift was like loose in my hand. I mean, the whole thing was just so rushed and so unfinished.
Wow.
So that was my Pacific test, one and only. And so when I got the opportunity, this all came about actually when so how do I explain this? So 1996, I'd raced in international touring cars for Opel and Calibra, and one of my teammates was Alexander Wirtz.
Right. Yeah.
So Alex and I, we developed a great friendship. I wasn't the best of friends with him when we started at Opel, because he had tried to have me off in a Formula 3 race at Silverstone the year before. Right. So I had harsh words. But then the next year we ended up being teammates for Joost in the Calibra team. And we got on brilliantly. He's a great guy. We're about the same height, build and whatever. And we did kart races together and all kinds of stuff. Both of us had pretty poor seasons with Calibra and in international touring cars. But we had a great laugh, brilliant time. And I'll remember that as well. Had some amazing teammates in that championship. And that's most probably another whole chat that we could do about just that season. Yeah. But so 97.
I actually did see the list of guys that were in the team that year. It was
nuts. Absolutely nuts.
It was,
It was just stacked with talent. So 97, I'd started driving the safety car through my connection with Peter Briggs. Charlie Whiting was the race director. Peter and Charlie were big friends, and it was all sort of like those guys together. And Charlie was like, "We need somebody to drive the safety car that knows what they're doing. And we've got this new deal with Mercedes," because that was just when the Mercedes deal had started. "And we need, someone like Oliver. Can you get him to come along, and I'll pay him?" And at the time it was sort of like cash, and sort of like off I went, and I started doing it at the British Grand Prix. And then so it goes on and on and on like that. Well, we come to the Japanese Grand Prix of 97, and I've done the safety car work, and I've then come directly back home. But as I had said just previously, that it's the Suzuka race, and then it goes to Adelaide. And so then I think it was that way around. But anyway, however it worked, all of the Benetton drivers, including Alex, who was the test driver in '97, were all still out in Japan. So there was nobody to test the Benetton, the B197. And so one of the engineers that I'd sort of been in and around during the International Touring Car Championship was now the test team engineer on the Benetton. And he knew that I was a similar size to Alex. And so I've literally landed back home, and the phone rings, and it's Nigel Clyde. And Nigel's the test team sort of main engineer, and he goes, Ollie, he said, we've got a bit of a problem. We're trying to run this car tomorrow at Silverstone. We've got this big new sponsor. And I was like, Nigel, you work for Benetton now, don't you? And he goes, yeah. He said, but what we want you to do is come up and get in the car. Just make sure you fit. It's Alex's seat, so you should fit. He said, we just need you to do 10 laps in the car. Just drive it around for 10 laps. It's got FedEx on the side. And we just need the car driven around so that they can see the sponsor on the side of the car. Right. Well, okay, fine. All right. So get to Silverstone, pull up to the Benetton truck, go in, and Nigel's there, and he introduced me to all the people. And I mean, there's like a huge team of people, and I'm like blown away by how many people they got there. I said, right, get your suits on, get my suits on, get in the car, fit, great, yeah, seats perfect, excellent. All right, okay, right, helmet, yeah, good, radio, yeah, good, right, earplugs, yeah, good, right, okay, right. Well, I'll run. They ran me through the manual just briefly on how this thing started and worked, and and they said, okay, right, off we go. And it was raining, and so I said, you still just want me to do 10 laps? And they said, yeah, just do 10 laps. Okay, so I go out, do my 10 laps, and come back in, and they go, you're doing all right. We could do 10 more. All right, okay, fine. And I came in after that, and they said, right, we'll just do the rest of the day. We'll just treat this as a normal test day. So at the end of the day, Nigel and the test team manager, who was it? I'm trying to think of the chap's name, Andy something. And he said, right, we're going to do the next 2 days, and we're going to pay you this much a day. And I was like, okay, this is fantastic. Someone's going to actually pay me to drive a Formula One car. Yeah. And that's how the relationship started with Benetton. And it was all through Nigel and my kind of like connections, and the fact that I was the same size as Alex. And so I got to test that car, and I did 3 days, all of them in the peeing rain. And it was just amazing. I just had the best time, and the car was brilliant to drive. It had so much downforce, loads of power. I'd driven nothing like it really before, not properly, for a decent amount of time. And that started a relationship that I had. So I drove and test drove for Benetton, which then turned into Renault, yes, all the way from '97 all the way through into 2006 was the last time I drove a car for them. Wow. And I did all of their start work at Santa Pod. So the period, I think it was 2003, 2004, when launch control was allowed or was reintroduced. I did all of that work with them. We developed that system, and that system for Renault at that time was worth about 1 or 2 rows on the grid each time. We got it refined so well. There was Gordon Pocock he was the electrical wizard who they had there. Then there was a guy called Naoki who was Yamaha. I think came from Yamaha. And he was extremely smart. And then there was a guy that came from Ferrari. And those 3 guys together just developed this system, and it was remarkable how it worked. And I did start after start after start after start up at Santa Pod for them, and it was extraordinary how it worked. And yeah, I did sort of some 9 years of testing for them, and it was Carlos Nunes was the test team sort of coordinator and manager, and Carlos just kept phoning me up saying, we got another day, got another day, got another day. And it was quite remarkable how much time I actually spent in that car. And I dovetailed that in with all of the stuff that I started doing in the United States, and it was a great group of people, and got loads of experience driving some amazing cars.
That's fantastic. I mean, I didn't realize that you'd been there for that long. I had it in my mind it was only maybe sort of 4 or 5 years, but it was obviously far longer than that.
Yeah, there was a couple of years where it didn't do so much, but by
Sure.
the end of it in 2006, I was too big for the car. I was sat out the top because a lot of the work I was doing was aero work, so it'd be just driving the car up and down an airfield and working at a constant speed, and they could just aero map it. And but once they got Fernando, the cars just started to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And Fernando's a little diddy person,
He's a wee
and
man.
he's a wee little man, and I'm quite tall, and so I just started going further and further out the car, and my head just started getting further and further in front of the airbox, and I kept saying to them, "Isn't this a problem that I'm sat this far up?" And they're like, "No, it's all right. Carry on." Yeah. So, but they won the championship
Right,
in 05 and 06, was it? So,
yes, Fernando. Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
Oh, there you go. I mean, just quickly on F1 cars. I mean, I've asked this to a few people that have raced various different cars, and they've all kind of said the same thing. Obviously, they love like the power and everything and the downforce, but it was the braking that kind of got their attention the most. Obviously, I spoke with like Will Power said the same thing. Tom Coronel and Robert Dornbos was the best one. I think he said he got into the Minardi, and he was out in Shanghai, I think it was, and he basically was used to braking at a certain point, and he slammed on the jam in the Minardi, and he basically his head shot forward, he head butted the steering wheel, or something, and he still had about 200 yards to go.
Yeah,
Before
there
the
is a bit
corner.
of that happens. Yeah, yeah, it's a recalibration, and you have this. Everybody has sort of like a comfort zone and a level that you get to with how fast a car can go. And I often sort of when I got to America, I started working a lot with two British drivers who are exceptional and massively experienced and taught me a lot in the United States, James Weaver and Andy Wallace. And they both of those guys are just extraordinary sort of technicians in the car and the ability to think, but they would sort of explain it like you've got a 150 mile an hour brain or a 160 mile an hour brain or a 180 mile an hour brain. And when you got in a Formula One car, you just had to calibrate your brain to as fast as it would possibly go, because these cars they would get to a speed so quickly. And at that time, the acceleration, the weight of the car was significantly lighter than they are now, and so they were getting to that speed so quickly. They would accelerate so fast, and so then they could decelerate so fast as well, because they were so light. And the downforce and the efficiency of the car, or the amount of drag that the car had as well. Places like Silverstone, where I tested a few times, or at Barcelona I tested a few times, you would sort of experience this huge amount of downforce that they just cranked on the car. So you'd be experiencing over 1G just when you lift off the throttle before you've even started to apply the brakes. And like most road cars can't generate more than 1G. That's most high performance road cars struggle to generate more than 1G, when you're braking at max braking. And so, even when you're at in a Formula One car and you've just lifted off the throttle, you're generating that amount of G load, and so yeah, they are remarkable cars, and you do have to completely recalibrate your head. And it's actually when you get out of the car and then you start driving your road car home that you're like, well, this is all happening extremely slowly, and it seems like you've got forever to think about stuff, and that's kind of the mindset you have to be in. You have to sort of like get yourself in that space and in that place, because when you're on board, if you're watching any on board in a Formula One car, you go, blimey, how are these guys doing it? But when you actually get into it, you put the helmet on and you get yourself in that headspace, you can slot into that sort of way of thinking, in that way of being, and it's like you all of a sudden put another load of processing power into your brain, and you can make that leap.
Wow, fascinating. I love it. Allowing your brain to just go as quick as it can, and just to try and keep up with it all, I guess.
Yeah, it is. It sometimes it does. You do get a little bit overwhelmed, and I think that's
I'm sure.
that's part of how as complex as the cars are now. I'm not entirely sure how they do it, but they do it amazingly well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just having a couple of comments that have come in, which I'm going to come to in just. Actually, I'll come to now. We've got a question here. It says, "What about the downforce and G in the Nurburgring edition of the Vauxhall Corsa VXR?"
Ah,
That's a great little
that's a
question.
good one, which I have no idea what the answer is. Sorry,
Yeah,
no idea what that. Yeah, I've never driven that car.
no, that's
Sorry.
no problem at all. Thought we may actually have driven it. No problem at all. I do need to say hello to the team over at Kersley Motorsport, who I've partnered with this year. They're in the Junior Saloon Car Championship and in the Hyundai Coupe Cup this year. So guys, go and check out Kersley Motorsport. Linked up with them this year. Very, very good people at not grassroots level, but certainly club racing level. Top draw people. That's where it all starts. And I did see actually Keith Mayo, just going back to 1993, Kevin Burt's teammate at Paul Stewart was Paul Evans.
Oh, yeah, Paul Evans.
1 to
That's
12.
it.
Good research, Keith. Good,
Yes. Well done.
well done.
Excellent.
And
Thank you.
and then Dario and then Jan Magnussen
Yeah.
thereafter.
Yeah.
And he's also said that going back to the Pacific thing, he said that Bernie kind of protected you in a way because of what was going on with Pacific. So
Yeah, in a way.
Cool, good stuff. Right, that's all caught up with that. Right, we need to move on a little bit. I'm loving the F1 stuff because we
Sure.
all do. But it was shortly after that, and obviously during that time, you ended up in the good old US of A.
Yeah.
And you said there was a link got you into Lola, into the Grand Am, things like that. I did see though. What I wanted to talk was it 2000. You started at the Petit Le Mans in Road America. Slightly retired, but did it kind of whet your appetite for maybe this kind of might open a new career path for you in the States? Were you thinking that way at the time?
Yeah, well, I kind of, and if I just sort of go back just a couple of steps further, you know, how I ended up out there was Keith Wiggins, Pacific. He left. That all folded. F1 team shut down. He then started at Lola's. He was the sales director for them. And I went to see Keith towards the end of '99, sort of saying, you know, my racing career in Europe has stalled out a little bit here. I want to try and get up to America. Can you help me get into a car? And he said, all right, okay, well, let me look at this. You know, there might be something we can do here. They had a customer, lived in Florida. He'd just bought himself a Lola B2K10, and that was their new car that they were looking to spread and get out into the US market. And it was going to be a Grand Am race, and it was at Homestead. And Keith said, look, we can give you, to add to the sort of like the package, we can give about £10,000 worth of spares. And I went, okay. And he said, but you need to find the other £10,000.
Right.
But at this point, I'd like sponsors and stuff, and you know, we weren't in a good place. And my wife and I, we got a house, and my wife was pregnant with our first child, Lily. And I said to Helen, my wife, I said, I'm thinking about going to race in the United States, and it's for this Lola team, and but they need a little bit of money. And she's like, oh, okay, well, how much? I said, well, pretty much all the savings we've got. So it's £10,000. And she's like, okay, well, I trust you. Let's go.
Wow.
Yeah. So I took.
That was easy.
Yeah. So I took all the savings that we had.
Goodness.
And in cash. And I was so paranoid someone was going to steal it off me. I ended up sort of wearing it underneath my shirt. And it's like I was some sort of drug mule or something. It was all really, really odd. I get there and I meet Scott Schubert and I hand him the money and he just goes, oh, thank you very much. And he just puts it in his briefcase and he just drives off. I was like, okay, so I've just given him all my savings, all of our savings. Am I actually going to? He said, oh, yeah, look, just turn up at the track and this guy, Phil Crichton, he's running the car and blah, 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 blah. And so I go in and I meet Phil and Rossella, who was the engineer, and Phil was lovely, a great guy, still running cars in the United States in different championships and whatnot. Phil Crichton Racing, Phil Crichton Motorsport, I think it was called. And so did that one race with them, and it went pretty well. It went well enough that I then got the eye of another Lola team in John Field. And John was racing the 9810, not the B2K10, so the previous iteration of the sports car. And John was like, I want to buy one of those B2K10s. He'd seen the performance I managed to put in the car. And so John bought one of those. At that time that John bought that car, Keith had decided he was going to leave Lola's and he was going to start his role at Bettenhausen, the IndyCar team.
Yeah.
And so Keith actually came with the car. He came with the car. I think the very first race that we did with it that year in 2000 was at Road America. And so Keith said, I'll engineer the car, because Keith was a reasonable engineer. And so we got to this crazy scenario that, like, you fast forward 5 years from 95 to 2000, and I'm there in Road America. Keith is engineering the car that I'm driving with John Field, with this Intersport team sponsored by Banana Joe's, and Intersport hadn't booked enough rooms, and so Keith and I had to share a room. So we were staying at this place just up the road in Elkhart Lake, and Keith and I ended up sharing a room together. And I said to him one of the nights, I said, "Isn't this weird?" I said, you fast forward 5 years from where we were to now, and we're now sharing a room in Elkhart Lake, and you're about to engineer and I'm about to drive for this guy called John Field. And, Keith was like, God, it is a bit mad. Anyway, so we did that race, and I think we did pretty well. It went on from there, and I don't think we ended up winning that year, but I did go to, like you say, to Petit Le Mans in 2000. I did that race with John. Didn't go very well, though.
What a fantastic circuit that is, Road Atlanta.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Love it.
Didn't go particularly to plan. I ended up crashing with a guy in the race, and this guy was driving a Porsche, and he was pretty famous. His name was Paul Newman, and
sure, I've heard of him somewhere.
Yeah, he's pretty well known.
Crikey.
And so Paul was at that time most probably in his early 80s, I think, and he was really not quick enough to be on the track. And I tried to pass him at this one particular part of the track coming down into turn 5, at Road Atlanta, the track really narrows, and I got to his right hand side and he hadn't seen me, and so he comes back across and he tags the left rear corner of my car, and he's sort of like, his car jumps in the air and spins to the inside and hits a concrete wall, and my car just goes straight down the track and I spin off into the gravel. So Paul's slapped to the wall on the driver's left as you're coming down the track, driver's left, but he's done it in a way that it's on the passenger side, so the driver's door can sort of come open, and if he doesn't come out the car for ages. And because I'm looking across the track, because the yellow flags come out, and I'm looking across, and he hasn't got out of the car, and I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure that's Paul Newman's car, and I'm pretty sure it's Paul Newman in it. And then he gets out, and I think, oh God, that is Paul Newman. Oh shit! And then he's hobbling, and he sort of goes to shut the door falls off, and then he just sort of hobbles around the back of the car, and then he falls over the wall, and it's proper sort of comedy fall, because he just disappears and he doesn't come back. It's because there's quite a big drop. Right. So he falls the other side of this concrete wall, and I'm thinking, oh God, and they're towing me out, and they've hooked me up to the back of the thing, and they've towed me back into the pit lane, and I get there. First person who meets me is John, the car owner, and he's absolutely tearing strips off of me because I've crashed his car and I've hit Paul Newman and all this sort of stuff. And so I've just recovered from that, and I'm sitting back in the back of the pits, and I've sort of tried to tell John it wasn't my fault, and you watch the replay and blah 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 blah. And then the next person I see is Dick Bennett, Dick Barber, who's a huge man, a big American man, and he was then saying, Ole, you need to come and see me. He's like, you're in a lot of trouble. There are thousands of women here. None of them like you right now. You're never going to make it out this track alive. And he was partnered with what was his name? The guy that was that was partnered with him, who was helping him run it, who ran the Panoses for years. God, Dave Price.
Oh,
Dave
wow.
Dave Price, very colourful with his language, and he was just standing behind Dick Bennett, just going, "Ollie, he said, you're dead, Ollie. You're dead. You're never going to make it out of here alive. This is over. Your career in America is done." Oh, Pricey was priceless, and so that wasn't my finest moment, and but it certainly added to the sort of like the stories and sort of like me understanding racing, and I kept trying to say it wasn't my fault, and they're like, "Yeah, you had Paul Newman Paul Newman broke his foot," and so yeah, I didn't live that down for a while, but things moved on. So I ended up with Celine in 2001, and I did that with.
I've just got the image of Paul Newman going over a wall now.
Yeah. Well, it was. I've still got it in my head as well, because I
Sure.
think I'm the only one who's seen it from my perspective. But yeah, it was. Yeah, one of those moments.
But it has made for a brilliant story.
It was one of those. Yeah.
That's terrific. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you like touched on 2001 with Celine, and I always liked the look of the Celine cars, and I've spoken to a couple of people that drove them, and they said that they were decent cars to drive. I mean, I've got here, I think it was 2001. Your first proper race in the car was the small matter of the 12 Hours of Sebring.
Yeah.
And you'd only done a couple of races in the series previously. Did you think that the 12 Hours of Sebring was going to go as well as it did?
No, definitely not.
No,
the car hadn't run for any longer than 3 hours without a massive problem.
Right.
So I thought it was going to be a rather short race. So I mean, it was all really last minute. I think I got a call from somebody at RML who had built the car, constructed the car, designed it.
Ray Malek, was it?
Yeah, Ray Malek's. Yeah, they said, yeah, quick, Ollie, you need to get on a plane out of Florida. We'll book you a hotel that's like an hour away from the track, and it was some dingy sort of motel somewhere. And got to the track, met my teammate Terry Borchella, who's just the loveliest guy, one of the funniest teammates I've ever had. Brilliant character. And then Franz Conrad was the other driver, and he was running the car. Now, Franz is as big a character as you will ever meet in motorsport. He has just ducked and dived his way through every single possible scenario, whether that's with a sponsor, with investors, whether that's with a manufacturer, with different tire manufacturers, fuel suppliers. He's like the guy that can always wheel and deal and work something out. So get there to Sebring. I qualify and pole. The car is rapid fast. It's just fantastic. I love driving it. It's really good. Sort of like the most single-seater sort of GT car that I drove for many a year. And RML did a fantastic job with it, and so did the Celine team. It was sort of Steve, Celine, and Franz sort of came to this agreement. So Franz says, "I'm going to start the race. I'm the most experienced." Okay, all right, Franz, off you go. So the race starts. Franz, within 5 laps, he's had contact with somebody, and the rear deck's hanging off. Okay, and I'd already been told before the start of the race that we had no spares. And the chap that I now do quite a lot of work with, an engineer, Dutch engineer, who's now based here in the UK, Ron Hartfeld, super guy. He was engineering me, and Ron was having real trouble getting hold of Franz on the radio. The radio was really in and out. And he said he's trying to tell Franz that he needs to pit because the rear deck's hanging off and we don't have a spare one. If it comes off, and it was hanging on by like one little clip. And this thing, I still have it in my memory. This thing, the rear deck's sort of flapping, and it's just sort of, as Franz is still making laps around Sebring, and I don't understand how it's still staying on. But eventually he gets heard. Franz hears Ron, and so Franz radios back and says, "Okay, get this, and this ready, and have it all on the pit wall. I'm going to fix it. And Ron's trying to tell him no, but Franz is like adamant, I'm going to fix it. So he comes in the next lap, pulls the car in. Before the car's even stopped, Franz has got the door open. He's out the car, runs around the back of it. And as the car's being fueled, and he's like waiting. He's waiting for the fueling to stop so that he can then start working on the car. So the fueling stops. He then starts alone. Doesn't want anybody else to touch the car. He's got the lock wire. He's got the tape. He's got the pliers and this and that. Fixes it all himself. Jumps back in the car, straps himself back up, and roars off out the pits. That was the only problem that we had the whole race. Only problem of the whole race. So we just keep driving around, and the car's fast, and we're just making way. And all of a sudden, we're in front of the Corvettes, and the Corvettes start to have problems. And then I'm in the car with I'm in the car with an hour to go, and I've already done like an hour and a half in the car, so I'm pretty, exhausted and thinking, okay, we're getting towards the end here. I'm going to get out. This is going to be the last stop. I'm going to get out, and Terry's going to get in and do the finish, because I'd already told them that on the radio. I pull in, get to the box, and I've like undone the belts, popped the door open, and as I try to get out, all I've got is the biggest mechanic they have is just shoving me back in the car. And I'm like trying to look up at him, and as he's just shoving me back in, he's doing my belts up, and he's like, and he slams the door, and I then look up out the windshield, and I can see both Terry and Franz are both standing there. Neither of them are in overalls. So I'm thinking, well, I guess I'm doing to the end then. So I tighten the belts up, and then I look a bit further up on the pit wall, and the two people in Corvette racing overalls are watching me, and one of them was Doug Feehan, and the other one was Gary Pratt. And they were watching the final stop to see if we made it, to see if there was any problems, or if anything that they could call a penalty on, or this or that. And there wasn't a problem, and I drove out the pits, and we drove around, and I stayed in front of the Corvettes, and we ended up winning the race. And that was the race that ended up really putting me on the map with Corvettes. All of a sudden, Gary Pratt knew who I was, Doug Feehan knew who I was, and so did all the Corvette racing drivers. And I then fast forward to a race that I did with John Field at Watkins Glen later on that year. We'd finished on the podium, and the person who was giving out the trophies at that race, it was a Grand Am race, and it was Watkins Glen, but it was sort of partnered in with a cup race that happened at the same time. And Ron Fellows was doing a cup race in NASCAR on this road course.
Yeah.
And so Ron was there giving the trophies out, and he gave him I think it was third place that John and I had finished. And he said to me as he's giving me the trophy, he says, "Have you got a minute after this podium ceremony?" He said, "It'd be good just to have a chat." Because I hadn't really spoken to Ron. We'd had sort of a few little niceties at drivers' meetings and other bits and pieces. So I met him around the back of the podium, and he said to me, "Look, Ollie, we're looking to make a change for 2002. Scott Pruitt, who's with us, he's going to go away from the team, and Johnny and I are looking for a new third. We've looked at your performance this year. We think you'd be a great fit. Give this guy a call." And he just hands me a slip of paper with a number on it. And I said, "Whose number is this?" And he says, "It's Doug's, or the doctor. Give the doctor a call." Because everybody ends up calling Doug Feehan that. He was like the doctor. He's always got an answer or a solution for everything, And so he said, "Give the doctor a call." And so I did that almost as soon as I could. And he said, "Look, why don't you come to the next race, which is going to be at Laguna Seca? You're going to be there with John Field." And I said, "I'd like to talk to you about a contract for 2002. So I get there, get to Laguna Seca, and meet with Doug. And he said, "Right, I want to offer you a contract here and now." He said, "But Gary Pratt, who runs the cars, and it's his team, he wants to see you drive his car." And he said, we won't give you a contract until you've driven his car." Okay. So then November 2001, sorry, I go to Sebring, and I drive one of his cars. I do 10 laps in it, and Gary comes over to me and he goes, "You can sign that contract right now." I said, "Yeah, you're in." Wow. So that was the start of this whole crazy world with Corvette that's still going now.
Yeah,
So
and
it is extraordinary when you have a relationship with a manufacturer that lasts this long. You know, the pictures on the wall behind me, and you know the Burnout and the 2010 car, and
yeah,
others that I've competed in. They're on dotted around on the walls around here in my office, and you know, just so many great memories, so many great cars, so many great teammates. Yeah, it's truly remarkable that I've had such a long career with them.
I mean, it is amazing. I mean, I should put it on my own personal social media, just give this a push, and said I can't think of many people who have had a longer run with a manufacturer than you have with Corvette. I mean, I know there's been a few others, but I mean, I've got notes here. I'm gonna have to handpick some of the sort of highlights, I guess, of your time with
Sure.
Corvette because there's a lot of them. But I mean, when it started, could you have imagined that here we are, what 23 years later now, that you'd
Yeah.
still be so involved? I mean, it must.
Uh,
You can't have
I
thought
mean,
that was going to happen.
I mean, whenever a program whenever you join a program as big as the Corvette racing program, you hope that you're part of it for as long as you possibly can be.
Yeah, of course.
Um, but you think that it's usually a 3 to 5 year cycle on most programs. Most don't last longer than that. And what was and Ron Fellow said this to me. He said, Oliver, he said, your timing has been impeccable in that you've joined this at the right age. He said, your late 20s, early 30s, around the right time when most young drivers have not had all the rough edges knocked off them. You've had enough experience in lots of different things to make you a really rounded and good sort of leader for the team. And that, you know, there's, as long as this program is going, you should have a job here. And he said, as long as you keep performing as you have done, yeah, this is sort of like 2005, 2006 that we're talking. And, you know, he was right. He really was, you know, that it's almost like he had a crystal ball. Ron's amazing like that, you know. Of all of the teammates I had, I could see that he was the one that had this calming influence on everybody. You know, never got rattled, never got sort of like spun up about stuff. You knew when he was peed off with you, or you know that something he was angry with you about something,
Yeah.
but very very rarely would he absolutely show it. And he always kept his cool. He always had a very good take on things. Always very just a real calming influence. Because often with drivers, when you get a big group of them together, they're just sort of like bouncing off the walls, and it's pretty crazy, and everybody's sort of a bit amped up. And he had this amazing ability just to lead with great calm, and be this sort of like this guiding sort of elderly, not elderly, I don't want to say elderly, but just this sort of mature sort of figure that would lead us into battle most times, and sometimes be the guy leading the charge. You know, I remember him winning. He won us Petit Le Mans in 2002 when we were racing against the Ferrari, and he was making the call for the right tire, and the engineer was disagreeing with him, and he was like, no, we should be on this one, and we run that to the end, and we did, and he won, and he beat the Ferrari, and we hadn't beat the Ferrari all year, not really, not in a straight fight. And I think Thomas Enger was in the car at the end, and yeah, Ron did a brilliant job. So, you know, he was really like the talismanic leader for Corvette racing. And then when he left, it was then sort of the reins were sort of kind of handed over to me to be sort of like the leader of the group,
Yeah.
sort of 2008, 2009, that sort of period.
I just got, I mean, I'd say just to look forward. I mean, I'm trying to think the guys who were coming through at that time.
So my teammates in 2000 and
Tommy Milner, wasn't it? And
no, well,
a bit later on, weren't they?
yeah, it was a bit later on, but in my teammates in 2000 and sort of 2005, 2006, one of my direct teammate was Olivier Beretta, who we had a huge amount of success with. And Olivier had come from the Viper, from Formula One, and then Panos and Vipers and bits and pieces, and fantastically fast in the GT1 car, amazing in the GT1 car. Just his ability in that car was extraordinary, and then his ability in the rain was just extraordinary. At Le Mans one year, he did like 4 hours straight in the car, and he was just a magic. And then the sort of third driver in the car was Jan Magnussen. And Jan and I, we'd competed against one another for years and years in all kinds of different things. And Formula Ford Festival in 1992, he won that. The two of us were racing for the victory that year in the Formula Ford Festival, and I was leading the final, and then he passed me around the outside at Paddock Hill Bend, which was one of those ones like, how did he do that? Yeah. But he did. And he won, and I crashed trying to pass and trying to get back around him around the outside at Druids. But so he won that year in '92, and on the podium with him that day was Gavin Magnussen. So Gavin had just been born, and Jan had him as his little son, and he took him onto the podium. Wow. As he won the Formula Ford Festival that year. So yeah, it's crazy how you sort of join all the dots of where things go. But Jan was an extraordinary teammate and super fast, and then he moved from my car in 2006 to the sister car in 2007, and then I had to race against him. And then that's the period that I found out how quick he really was. When we're then going at it, and we had these titanic battles sometimes. And the two of us were trying to not drive one another off the track, but you were trying to get away from one another. We would be going off the track because we would just be so just pushing the limits everywhere, on every last little bit at Sebring, or street circuits at Long Beach, or at St. Petersburg, or whether we were racing at someone like Mid Ohio or Road America, or I crashed. He crashed in front. He crashed in front of me at Sebring, and I crashed in front of him at Road America, both times trying to get away from one another. And the team was like, "What are you two doing?" We just said, "Well, we're just racing hard, and we're just trying to get away from one another. And this is what you employ us to do, is to race hard. And sometimes we get it a bit wrong." And they're like, "Okay,"
which is the response you want, isn't it?
Yeah, you do. I mean, Gary would be a little bit more angry than that, and he wouldn't. Gary did take it very personally when you crashed his car, and that was the whole. If I rewind back to the end of 2001 when I first tested the car, that was the whole reason why Gary wanted to see me test the car, because he wanted to see how I drove his car. He wanted to see if I got overawed by it, or I was intimidated, or if I was going to crash it. Because I then saw how they did tests with other drivers when they're trying to select other drivers to join the team. And anybody that crashed the car or had an incident with the car on that first test, they never came back.
They were out.
They were done.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, there's so much we can cover with Corvette. I mean, you're there for so long. What I do want to do is I want to sidestep to, obviously we'll come back to IMSA shortly, and the Elms and all that. But Le Mans, you've done rather well at Le Mans.
Yeah.
I have my little Le Mans tribute shirt on here.
Yeah.
You can read backwards. Recent birthday present, very nice.
Right.
You started there 19 times, didn't you? But you've had 5 class wins. At Le Mans. Just about Le Mans in general. I mean, we all know what it is, and everyone who's raced there says there's something special about it. And I did read somewhere that you just loved everything about Le Mans every time you went. What's it like the first time you get there, and the first time there that you're involved, that you're inside the ropes?
It is quite an overwhelming sort of environment that you get into, and it is the track is vast and fast, and sort of it takes a little bit of time to sort of get it to embed in your mind. The first time I did it was 2001, and that was with Celine. And it rained and rained and rained that year. 18 hours it rained. and that was the very worst conditions I ever competed in at Le Mans. Actually, that very first year, it was so bad. At times, I'll be driving down the first part of the Orne Diaz before the first chicane, and you couldn't see where you're going. And so you'd be looking out the side window and you'd be looking, okay, right, there's the restaurant. Okay, there's the 300 board. All right, I better lift. So then you lift and then you start to brake, and then the whole time you're looking and then listening about, okay, have the cars in front, have they done the same? Or, is there somebody coming from behind and you can sort of hear? And so you're trying to use every single sense to understand where you are, but also understand where all the other cars are. And then you're trying to drive outside of the tram lines, because at that point, that part of the track hadn't been resurfaced for a while. And so there was these big channels of water inside the tram lines on each side of the road, where when you go down the Orne Diaz, you see that there are about 3 different sort of areas where it's not heavy industry, but it's kind of what you would call a bricolage or a DIY store. Yeah. And there's slabs and bricks and pallets of stuff that's being delivered. So there's trucks that are going down this road through the year that slowly causing those ruts within the tarmac. And on the hot days, the ruts just get that little bit deeper, and that's exactly what was happening there that day, that those ruts were just filling up with water. So you were trying to sort of like drive outside the ruts, not get sucked into them, because as soon as you did, you could start to aquaplane. And then you're trying to sort of pick where, okay, there's a braking point, or can you hear something, or can you smell something, or is there something on fire, and then you're trying to deal with the water inside the car, and it was leaking in through all of the different rivets and whether you got the hinges of the door on the sleemer in the roof, and so you'd have it coming in on top of you, but then also all over all the electrics, and you'd be looking at that going, well, that's not going to work for very long. And then the windshield was then steaming up, and I was on the radio saying, the windshield steaming up, and they're like, well, we don't really have a solution. Oh, but we do actually. At the next stop, we'll come in with a solution. And so I stop. They're refueling, and they open the door, and they're refilling the drinks bottle, and then they throw in this stick. And the stick's just got quite long, and it just got a rag on the end of it, taped on the end of it. And they said, well, just use the stick just to clean the windscreen on the inside. So then you start doing, you do that. They're sat in the pit stop, and then you drive out, and then you go, oh, it's starting to steam up again. So then you'd be driving one-handed, shifting, and then trying to wipe the inside of the windscreen, and then trying to wipe the side windows. And it just was sort of, you started to sort of go, okay, how much can I actually do in the car at the same time? And that was a real test. That was one of the biggest tests I ever had in a race car. But
that's unbelievable.
One-handed
with a stick.
Yeah, in the rain. Yeah, it was good fun.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it. But the times that particularly the points where winning in 2002, and then the victories in 4, 5, and 6 were extraordinary there. Just to be able to do that 3 years in a row with the same teammates, same number car, same crew, out of the same garage. I don't think anybody's ever done it since. Not 3 years in a row.
It feels unlikely, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, because driver lineups usually change, or teams change, or they move garages, or something happens. But we stayed exactly the same for 3 years.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And
yeah, there was an element of that.
The team obviously feeling that as well.
Yeah. But there was a very difficult period between 2006 and the next one in 2015, which just seemed to go on for an eternity. And the difference in between winning in 2006 and winning in 2015, the age of my teammates, and just the way that things were, social media.
That was another thing I read about. They were, I forget who you were who you're with. It was Tom. Oh, was it Jordan Taylor, wasn't
Tommy
it?
Tommy Milner and Jordan Taylor, yeah.
Yeah, and they're obviously a bit younger, but
Yep.
obviously social media had kicked on, isn't it? And I remember you were on the podium, and they were all over social media, and you're going,
Yeah. Yeah. There was an element of that, yeah, absolutely. And but that was Tommy and Jordan had been sort of put with me to sort of go, okay, well, I was a captain, and they were sort of, you need to learn off this guy, and so I sort of trained them up, and now they're both brilliant. Jordan and Tommy, both of them, super proud of what they do now and where they're at with their careers and what they're achieving. And I couldn't have been prouder of Tommy at the weekend with his response to everything that happened with the BMW and how he handled all of that. And he was just
that
so level-headed. Just he was riled up in the car, and everybody could see that by his hand gesture as he drove by. But that is so Tommy. What he did there is like absolutely robust in his response while he's in the car. He then gets out of the car, collects himself, and he's like, I know what I'm going to say. I know I'm going to say it. I know how I want this to be seen in the media. And that was brilliant. I just thought that's an absolute pro, not taking, no messing on the track, all absolutely fighting and fully business on the track. But then you stop, you get out of the car, and you're like, okay, I need to compose myself here and think about how I'm going to get my message out there about what's just happened, and did brilliantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it was very well received by, I think, everyone who.
Yeah, it was very
saw
much
it
so.
and heard it, which is great, especially with all the stuff that's going on with the FIA and F1 at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of comparisons.
Which we're not going to get into.
No.
Just a couple of bits about Le Mans that I want to sort of touch on. Obviously, 2002 first win. What is it like on that podium for the first time? I mean, as I said, I've spoken to a lot of people who have won the race. I mean, I've spoken to like Emmanuel Pirot and Jackie Innes and like Johansson and Brabham and guys like that. Like Tim Schenken as well. And they just said there's nothing quite like being on the podium at Le Mans because it's so famous. Everyone.
It is. It is
an amazing feeling.
Yeah, it's certainly the podium that you get the biggest sort of chills from, and the biggest sort of like, wow, this is really big. And the way that they now do it with, you're out over the pit lane, and they now they open the track up, and you've got this sea of people in front of you, and your family there, and you can sort of see some of them below you, and it also seems like half of Denmark is there as well, particularly when when Tom was there and Jan and whatnot. So it was always an amazing atmosphere, and it just had something very, very special about it that you can't. And that's the thing about Le Mans. It has this its own character, its own charisma, its own way of generating this sort of atmosphere in this. It is really a bit of a magical place, and I don't think the French even know what it is about it, because they've tried for so long to bottle it up and take it somewhere else and put it into other races, and whether that's sort of the WEC or the ELMS and the format and the way that the ACO rules racing works is brilliant. I think it's fantastic for Pro-Am racing as well as pro racing and multiple teams and different classes, and it's really remarkable racing. But actually trying to take that Le Mans sort of spirit and character from that actual place and bottle it up and put it somewhere else, it's almost impossible to do, because that it generates its own atmosphere, its own sort of mystique and character that is just, every time I raced there and competed there, it would always give me something special, and I would be like, wow, this is really quite a remarkable place to race. And I never ever left there thinking, well, that was a bit, some difficult races and some really sad races, but never sort of left there going, well, that wasn't much of an event. or they didn't do that very well, or there's always really something to it. And it's loads of drivers might sort of talk about how a 24-hour race is like this great big book that's being written, and each hour is like a chapter, and you're writing the chapters of the book because there's so much was happening each hour of the race. And it's sort of like Le Mans is like that, but each day is like that you're there. You're writing a whole book about all the different things that are happening, whether it's the practice sessions or the scrutineering that you have, or the practice sessions that you have, or the parade downtown, or whether it's the warm up in the morning, which they do every year, and they have done for years, and someone always crashes, and you go, well, why do we keep doing this? Because this is mad. Don't do it. Gary Pratt was always like, why are we doing warm up? Because it was risking the car. The car's prepared to an inch of its life. The guys have had a whole day to prepare it. Why are we doing warm up? This is mad. Don't do it. Because all the drivers drive the car and go, it's not good. Don't like it. It's like this. And then the engineer's going, well, yeah, but this wasn't up to temperature, and you didn't quite get that to the right pressure, and that wasn't quite right. But then you start second guessing, and the engineers are sitting there pouring over all the data, and everybody's stressing about it. And you think, just stop.
Leave it.
Don't touch it. Gary Pratt was like, don't go out. Do not. And the engineering team would be constantly trying to convince him, no, we need to go out and check this. And Gary's like, oh no, God, this is just unbelievable. Don't do it. So there's that, and then there's the start of the race, and then how the race starts, or the lead up to the race, and all the stuff on the grid, and blah 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 blah, and who's starting the race, and is it raining, is it dry, is it this, is it that? No. There's just a million things you could write about and like put in this book, and it just fills up your experience and knowledge of it. It really is quite a remarkable place.
That's fantastic. I love that. Absolutely love that. Because it's fantastic. Even as fans, we love it. But from you guys inside the ropes and the way you've described it, it's wonderful stuff. I mean, one thing I do remember was the scrap you had with the Aston Martin in 2006. That was a bit of a tussle towards the end, and you came out on the wrong side of it. That must be nice to sort of, because like previously you'd won by a few laps, but that one was pretty close, wasn't it? That must have been a good one.
Yeah. So 2006 was an epic year. Very hot. Jan did a great job. We were battling away with them, and it was always brilliant to fight and battle with Aston Martin and ProDrive. They're the only team that Pratt and Miller had a very special relationship with, partly due to how we raced against one another for so many years. But there was always that sort of crossover between, they recognized that both sets of crew and both sets of driver lineup, engineering, there was absolutely really nothing between us at times. And we were all trying to put each other in their place, but did it with a huge amount of respect. And before the start of each race, with Aston Martin ProDrive, the crews would both meet and shake hands, and then after the race, they'd meet and shake hands. However it finished, and that. Again, it comes down to the people who are in charge, and the philosophy and the way that we go about the races. George Howard Chappell was the guy that was running the ProDrive Aston Martin team at the time. A brilliant guy, wildly intelligent, a great guy to sort of, not a great guy to have against you, because he was very smart and very good. But sometimes they would make a mistake, or we would just have something a little bit better than they would, or the other way around. We'd make a mistake and they'd just be a little bit better than we would. But never at any point did the respect disappear. And with George, for about 4 or 5 years, I had a bet with him before every Le Mans on who was going to win. It was always like £50 wagers, and through 4, 5, and 6. Through 5, 6, and 7. we did this, and I won twice and he won once.
Yeah.
And I think I think we ended up even, because I think in 2008 they won. So yeah, anyway, so that was just great. Just there's so many different pieces in that relationship between ProDrive and Pratt and Miller that made it extremely special, and we always enjoyed that. And it's most probably the part or the era and the years that I remember the most fondly of all the years I did at Le Mans. Just because it was brilliant cars. GT1 back then was just amazing. The power, the braking performance, the downforce, the tire that we were on with Michelin, it was just everything about it. The cars were just brilliant to drive, really raw, really. There was no sort of driver aids, and it was 3 pedals still. It was sequential, but you just had to sort of, you still had to look after a little bit, but it was really, really hard racing and brilliant fun.
Yeah, fantastic. Again, great to hear from inside the ropes as well. And yeah, it's lovely that there's that respect between the two teams as well, which is great to hear. Just very quickly before we move on, because there's a couple of bits on the IMSA stuff that I want to touch on. But you mentioned it was like half of Denmark were at Le Mans. Very sad incident, which I don't want to spend too long on, but I knew he was part of racing with Alan Simonsen. I believe the first driver lost in a race since Joey Gartner, I think, years and years before. But you were. It's always very difficult to talk about this, but I mean, you were pretty much right behind, weren't you?
I was right.
It looked really innocuous. I mean, did it? I mean, I guess as you circulated around, you knew it was serious because the screens came up and everything. But I just very briefly, so I don't want to go on about it. But I mean, what was your kind of view of it?
Well, he was right in front of me. I was racing him, and he had come through Tetra Rouge, and he had there was spots of rain in the air, and at those points, at that time with the painting of the curbs as they'd done it, when they got wet, they were extremely slippery. And Alan, he came through Tetra Rouge, and he was trying to get away from me so that I didn't get the toe, or as much of toe as he wanted to have, for me to have as little as toe as possible. It's the classic thing. It was the second lap of the race, and he just, as he came off the curb, the car started to slide, and he sort of like caught it, but then it gripped, and then he went back the other way, and he slid right past the barrier on the left side, and then he went out of view, and I didn't see him hit the wall. Okay. I went past him, and it was only when I came back the next lap that it was like, okay. And then he was there the next lap, and the next lap, and it was like 5 laps, and we were like,
this is a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
really shit.
Yeah, very sad. And I imagine it's very difficult to continue to go racing after that, but obviously that's what you're there for, and you kind of have to.
Yeah, we did speak about it for quite some time, in when we got out of the car. But when I got out of the car and I spoke to Jan, and it's just the whole. That was most probably the hardest race I ever did there. I'm sure. Just all of us trying to continue, and some drivers saying that they wanted to stop.
It's understandable.
And then others sort of saying, well, what would he have wanted?
Yeah,
he would have wanted for all of us to continue, and I mean, it's unbelievably sad. Yeah, really, really sad. But racing is dangerous, and he was undone by something that they've now addressed and changed in where the barrier that he hit, and the way it was up against the trees. Right, the exit there of Tetra Rouge, the first part of Honor Diaz, and also the way that the seats are mounted inside the cars. So stuff was learnt, but it's so sad, and it's a waste that such a great driver and such a great person sort of had to be sort of wasted for us to learn that lesson. But It's racing.
Yeah, it's a real shame. I do appreciate you talking about it, because it's not, obviously, it's never easy.
No.
Happier things. Just a couple of bits actually that stuck out. I mean,
Sure.
again, there's so much we could talk about your time in the States. There was one I actually highlighted it in yellow as, in my eyes, the Oliver Gavin season, 2007. You obviously won the championship. You won, like the Arms Championship, 2 or 3 years in a row. 2007 was just monumentally good. I mean, you guys were on a roll, within the team, and Corvette with the team to beat and everything. But again, it's one of those. Could you have imagined the season could have gone as well as it did? I mean, I think you were on the podium in every single race. You won 9 of them.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Second in
was.
the other 2. I mean, it was an astonishing season.
Yeah, it was. 2007 was a great year. And I do remember it, for being one of those ones where we just, whatever Olivier and I were doing, it just seemed to work. And I think Steve Cole was our engineer that year, and it just all seemed to sort of click together. And everywhere that Olivier and I just went, and I think that was also a year we had some fantastically hot weather in the United States, and everywhere we went, it seemed like it was record weather conditions.
Right.
But that car was just amazing to drive, brilliant fun, so much power. The tracks that we went to, Michelin had produced a brilliant tire that we'd done a boatload of testing on. Olivier was particularly clued in on all of that. And that did help us a bit. And Ron and Johnny was sort of, I think that was coming sort of towards the end of their time together, and Jan was in that car as well for some of the races, I believe. We did have Max with us, Max Papis, and Max was great to have on board. Bit of a crazy character, larger than life. He did have a bit of an incident at Le Mans, which took us out of the race, which was a shame. He ran over something, he took the floor off, and then took us out of contention. Otherwise, I think we could have won. But not that I've held it against him. It's all right. Yeah, the Corvette was the class of the field that year, and we were really in a groove, Olivia and I, and it was wonderful season. I remember, a lot of fun.
Yeah, a cracking one. 2 races that I do want to touch on. I have to touch on 2010 Petit Le Mans. What a finish that was! When you beat the Ferrari, I think it was in the
crazy. Yeah, that was.
That I do remember that one.
I remember driving out the pits for the last time, and my engineer Chuck Houghton, he'd been sort of talking to me about it during coming down the pit lane and what we need to be doing, and then the chief engineer Doug Louth, he comes on the radio, and he's sort of saying, "Oh golly, we need you to drive as fast as you can, but don't use the tires, don't use any fuel, and don't use the brakes." And I was like, "Okay, doesn't actually work like that. If you want me to go fast, I need to start using stuff. I've got to." And he's like, "No, but you just got to try and save as much as you possibly can." So I'm chasing this Ferrari down, and it's the Ricci Ferrari, and there's a second, actually no, because we had to stop for a splash of fuel before the end, and this is what undid the Ferrari team. And we've been racing this Ricci Ferrari the whole 10 hours, and when there'd not been much more than about a couple of seconds between us.
Yeah.
Either we're in the lead or they're in the lead. And Jan and I were doing all of the main heavy lifting. Manu Collard was with us. He only drove the car for 40 minutes. And that was just basically so that Chuck could reset Jan's drive time and my drive time, so that we could then just be doing it between us. Because Manu just didn't really get on with the car. I just didn't really like it. So he nearly got hit twice and went off the track once. And like Chuck was just trying to get him out of the car as he possibly could, fast as he possibly could. So I've done that. I've done that sort of like second to last stint, and I'm just coming in for a splash of fuel, and I've seen that Ricci have been in as well, and so it's all a time stop, not taking any tires, and it's dark, and you know, and I've kind of lost track of exactly where they're at, and I've come around on it. I know it's like the next time by, it's 2 to go. Chuck's telling me he's counting me down the laps, and I've come over the start finish line and 2 to go, and the fuel alarms come on, and I know around Atlanta it's like between like 1.5 to like 1 3/4 laps you can do in a tank of fuel on with the fuel alarm on.
Oh, right.
And I'm thinking, oh, this is not going to go well, and but I'm still just pedaling, like just rowing up through the gears and pedaling like crazy, trying to catch the Ferrari, and I can just about see it. And but they were just far enough in front of us that as you come out of turn 7, I could see them going over the crest, but they would disappear out of view. And there was other cars around, and you know, this was on the last lap of the race, and the fuel alarm's still on. I mean, it's like it just seems even brighter in the cockpit, because I'm thinking it's just gonna cough at any second. Motor's gonna cough. So I go over the crest, and I'm like, where is the Ferrari? And then before I know it, I'm passing this car, and I'm thinking, is that the car I'm racing, or is that the sister car? And I can't see it. So I've gone past it so fast because it's clearly slowing down so quickly. And I get into the braking zone at the parking lot there at turn 10, through there and out and over the crest at 11 and down into 12. And I'm thinking, I can't see the Ferrari anywhere. And then Chuck, the radio just comes on, and Chuck's just going, "We've won. We've won. I can't believe it. We've won." And I can hear in the background everybody screaming. The whole pit just explodes.
Wow.
Because we've gone from second to, on the very last lap of the race, we come through and we pass the Ferrari with 3 corners to go. Wow. And they'd run out of fuel.
Because they run out, they hadn't stopped.
They had stopped, but what they hadn't done from further analysis was that the fueler had plugged in for the right amount of time, but the venter on the far side of the car, because it was fuel one side, vent the other, the venter hadn't plugged in quite early enough. It's bobbled, hadn't got it on, so the fuel only starts going in when it can be vented, because of pressurized system. And so the engineer could only see the fueling side, so he's timing off the fueler, so he thinks the fueler has been plugged in for 10 seconds, but he was actually only plugged in for 8. Yeah. So they only had 8 seconds worth of fuel, so they ran out.
Wow.
But that shows you how much of a team sport it is, and how the pressure is on everybody to perform. And that's what Pratt & Miller and Corvette Racing was so good at, time and time again. Brilliant people, great people in every single department. And so the mistakes that were made were relatively few or relatively small.
Yeah.
And so they always sort of said, how did Pratt & Miller keep winning races, or Corvette Racing keep winning races? And you go, well, it's because they've got good people. And the turnover of people was generally pretty low. They were pretty very, very experienced people, and they knew what they were doing. And we were winning races through just having a lot of racing intelligence. Not necessarily from having the fastest car, or necessarily having the best strategy, but we would put a great car on the grid. The car would be extremely well maintained, and then every problem that came up in a race, it'd be worked really hard, and they'll come up with a solution and the best way of fixing it, and away we'd go. And more often than not, we'd end up winning. That's another fine example of it, just working the problems. And that particular victory in 2010, I remember standing on the podium there, and Jan and I were absolutely just copper hoop, just delighted, couldn't believe it. And Collard was just like, I don't even know how I got here. It's just like, sure. It was one of those ones. Is like, well, I just don't. Yeah. So yeah, that was, that was certainly one of the ones that the team were extremely proud of. And that is the very last time that Pratt & Miller and Corvette Racing have won at Petit Le Mans. They have not won since 2010. Yeah, that it's become an absolute sort of bogey track for them.
Yeah,
they can't seem to find their way out of that sort of hole.
Just one of those strange things.
Yeah.
Right. I am very aware of the time, and we're kicking on a bit. I don't want to keep
Yeah.
everyone too late, but I do have to talk to you about Daytona.
Right.
2016, absolutely monumentally good finish for us
Yeah.
fans.
It
Obviously, it was you and you and your teammate Antonio. I mean, obviously, we saw how the race went. It comes down to the last bit, record-breaking finish. What's your reaction when you're told that you can race each other as long as you don't bump into each other? Because you must be, you think we've been here for 23 and a half hours. It's us two, one against the other.
I was sort of like, are you sure?
Right.
Are you sure you want to do that? I don't think that's a good idea. I think that's a really terrible idea, us racing one another right now. I think we should drive around as we are. And then they said, no, we're going to race. And I was like, oh, of all the people I need to race, Antonio. You know, brilliant mate, great guy, one of my biggest friends in the sport. And I thought, oh God, I've got to race this guy now for the last 30 minutes of this race. And I knew he was coming on fresher tyres than me.
Yeah.
And it's the end of a 24-hour race, and you know you've been through the night, and you're like, okay, you've got to somehow find the strength to switch yourself on again, and fight as fairly and as cleanly as you possibly can, no contact. And so that proved to be one of the hardest 30 minutes I've had in any race car ever.
Yeah,
and somebody sent me some onboard footage from Antonio's car for that last lap the other day. I hadn't seen it ever before.
Was that when he went round the outside? And
No. That was after. This was after this point. But the piece where he goes around the outside, he had been lining me up for that for laps and laps, and he was trying to get the right run through the bus stop. And then he was trying to get the right amount of side draft and get the deal done just before the brake zone into turn one. And that was the biggest issue for him trying to get past me, because he could sort of like toe up behind me, but then it would be side draft or not enough room, or would always be on the outside and wouldn't quite be able to get back in front of me. Well, that one particular time, which has been replayed, he manages to just about get in front of me and almost pull in front.
Yeah.
Then he hits the brake, but he most probably brakes 2 meters too late and just a little bit too hard, and he just has a little bit of a bobble, and he ends up having to just open the wheel a tiny amount.
Yeah.
Then there is a crown in the road there as you're going into turn one, which it's really, really hard to see. Even when you're walking it, it's really hard to see, but there is. And he just got on the wrong side of that, and it just dragged him wide. And I just thought, okay, if I hook my car up on the inside of that crown,
it can take you in.
I can sort of slingshot through on the inside. He's just gone wide enough. I mean, and there was barely a cigarette paper between the two of us as we came through and off and into two. So we then sort of drove off that, and there was maybe only 5 laps left, I think. And I've got the team on the radio going, you've got to race cleanly, you've got to race fair, you can't block, you can't this, you can't that. And Antonio knew that he had to, on the last lap, he had to get it absolutely right. So this footage that I saw, I could see that he was lining me up completely in the way that he was trying to use all of his momentum to get up and alongside me by the start-finish line. It's one of the things at Daytona that it kind of generates these really close finishes just by the way that the actual momentum that you need and the speed that everybody carries through the bus stop, and then the amount of tow that a car can get up on something else, and the banking and the way that everything works before you get to the tri-oval, and where the actual stripe is at the tri-oval.
Yep.
It is super close in who's going to get there first, in between the car in the lead or the car that's looking to overtake, and the way and how efficient the car is, how much power that car has, and the way that the side draft works, wind direction, all these different things are all adding into the mix. So Antonio, as he came onto that last lap, I could see from this footage I was sent that he was a decent way back, but he was trying to work his performance from his tyres all the way through the infield and then the runoff of 6 to then get the ideal amount of tow all the way down to the bus stop, and then trying to get all as much momentum through the bus stop and off the bus stop. So he was then right in the slot to then use the momentum to then slingshot past me and then get to the line first. There's not, it was, he was so close. He was so, I mean, 0.034 of a second was the difference between us at the end. It was about a meter.
300.
Yeah. And so, you know, as I came off the bus stop for the last time, I was doing the thing you do in a go-kart, you know, that you jumping up and down in the seat, you know, I was willing, I was screaming in the car. I was just willing it forward.
Come on.
I was just shouting, and I could sort of see him in the mirror and the radar and the rear view camera that we've got. And you know, the front of his car looked huge, and you know, and how close he was. And then he came up alongside me, and I was willing for the line to come, and it just came soon enough for me and just a bit too late for him.
I mean,
but it was
did
a
you know that you'd got him when you crossed the line? Was it relief, or was it a case of did I
was pretty sure that I'd got it, and then it was confirmed to me. But it was the most extraordinary experience, those last 30 minutes, and the pressure, the intensity of it all, the sort of the calls from on the radio. You could sense the sort of anxiety over the radio in Chuck's voice, and then the other people in the background. You know, you could almost like you could sort of, they were telegraphing it down the radio to you, and you're just so uber focused on trying to give your all and every bit of performance that you possibly can. But it was just enough. It was absolutely that was all I had that day, and it was rather bizarre because later on that year at Le Mans, you know, Antonio and I would regularly go out running together, and we through that sort of like that bit of the year between Daytona and Le Mans, you know, the picture had been just constantly everywhere, and Antonio hated it, and I obviously liked it. And we were out running at Le Mans, doing a lap of the track, and we were nearly back into the Porsche curves, and this guy goes by in this Renault sort of estate station wagon thing, and he's looking at both of us as he goes by, and he's slowing right down, and then he stops, and he's about, I don't know, 100 yards back down the road. And I'm like looking at Antonio, and Antonio's looking at me, and he goes, he has one of those pictures, doesn't he? I know he does. I know he's got a picture of the Daytona finish. And I was like, how do you know? He says, I just know. And so this guy gets out of his car and he's waving at us. And so we run back, and he goes, I have something for you to sign. I have something for you to sign. And he reaches in his car and he pulls this picture out, and it's of the Daytona finish. And Antonio just looks at me and he goes, this thing just haunts me. Everywhere I go, this picture just haunts me.
Oh, bless
I can't escape it. And I was like, I quite like it. And he goes, and he was using lots of words, none of them really very nice. And then we ran very quickly back from there, and he didn't talk much all the way back. He was proper grumpy all the way back. And then we get into the hospitality there at Corvette Racing, and the picture that they've got up, they would have like 5 or 6 pictures dotted around the hospitality. No. And the one that you would stand in front of every meal time to get your main meal was that. And Antonio would look at it every time, and he's going, I can't escape it. And I'm like, I quite like that picture. Let's quite get that. And he just, I don't think he's ever going to forgive me. But we're still good mates. We are still good mates, and he kind of glosses over it whenever we start talking about it.
No, great stuff. That's brilliant. I have just seen a comment in the comment section. Andrew Bishop, your timing is perfect. You said that you finished 3rd at Bathurst in 2014.
Yeah.
That my finger was on the notes there. Look, I don't know.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
But
perfect timing, Andrew. just quickly, opinions on Bathurst V8 supercars. That must have been a great experience.
Some of the hardest cars that I ever drove to try and get your head around. Bathurst is an extraordinary racetrack to drive on,
It's a real
and
isn't it?
and the Bathurst 1000 is right up there with one of the very best races in the world and one of the very hardest races to win.
Absolutely.
And all of those guys competing out there in V8 supercars or supercars now, I mean, they are, unbelievably skilled in that sort of arena and those vehicles. And I was lucky enough to share the car with Nick, and Nick's a brilliant driver, a great guy, someone that we stayed friends. He was somebody that taught me a lot about supercars and how to drive them and what to do, what not to do. Unbelievably supportive. We spent a lot of time together training and sort of just generally sort of sharing philosophies on stuff and about racing. He's got a great family, and I've got a real sort of good relationship with Nick and all of those guys that I was around down there in supercars, and I look back on it very fondly. Yet the result there at Bathurst in 2014, that third place, was one of those most remarkable last laps that I've ever seen. Everybody running out of fuel. Everybody sort of like pushing it to the very limit, and Nick drove a brilliant last stint and brought the car home third, and that really was a great result. And to be able to stand there on the podium, I'd watched Bathurst and the Bathurst 1000 growing up as a kid on Grandstand. That was the thing that I'd watch it on with.
But like a week later, though, a week after.
Yeah, it would always be a week later, and just Des Lynam always intro it, and Steve Ryder or whoever, and I just absolutely loved it. So fell in love with the place, and then to actually be able to go back there and compete there, I was like, wow, this is pretty special. The race that very first race I ever did at Bathurst was the 12-hour, and I was lucky enough to start that race the very first time I did it, and it starts in the dark, and it's the most surreal sort of experience where you are starting a race in the dark and it goes to the light, so you see the sun come up and you think this must be the only race in the world that does this. And that place with the sun coming up and it just everything sort of over the top of the mountain skyline, whatever, and you're coming down through all of those iconic corners, and the sun just coming up over the horizon, the sunrise. It's the most sort of surreal but sort of magical experience that you can have in a race car, and I'm just so pleased that I managed to do that. Did we have a great car? No, the car broke, but the fact that I managed to do that was pretty special. And certainly something I'll always remember. So
I'm sure that's quite a view. Just quick, I mean, I just want to touch on the bit where you did. Yes, Andrew Bishop has just said it's the Bathurst 12 hours this weekend. Absolutely, I've already written an article for it.
Brilliant.
Which is going to be good. Some cool looking cars, and Adam Christodoulou, who came on just last year, he's back next year, so we'll be following Adam.
Great.
Good lad. Just quickly, I did read that you started to think about retirement on a very wet race at Charlotte, I think it was, and things like that. Just to touch on when you do choose to retire full time, I mean, was it tough, or was it just the right time, did you think?
I think at that point it was 2020. It was all the pandemic. It was all of that was really nasty. Spending a lot.
In the States, hadn't you, as well?
Yeah, it got stuck in the so it was 8 weeks at a time in the United States. Time away from the family. I had recognised that things in the new car and the C8. C8R, I just wasn't clicking with it, and my timing was just off, and I was thinking this is not going in the right direction, and I knew that the team were sort of like looking at me going, this is maybe, is this going to be the last year, or is it going to be one more, or and I thought that race in Charlotte on the Roval where it was just horrendous. I was just this is for me. I did not. I drove past the pits. lap after lap after lap, nearly pulling into the pits going, I've had enough. I can't do this anymore. And I didn't. I continued, and I ended up bringing the car in like 3rd or 4th place and handing it over to Tommy. I didn't crash. Others did. And Tommy continued, but then Tommy got caught out in the conditions, and we crashed, and we had a big accident. But I think that my mind was already set and made up by that point, and I was like, yeah, it's got to stop. And so at the end of 20 at Sebring, it was sort of like, this is my last full year. And my wife came out for the last race, and that was great, but we still had loads of restrictions, and it was kind of a tough deal.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But I think I look back on it now and I go, I did step away at the right time.
Yeah,
I did.
And there was a lovely little tribute, wasn't there, at Sebring on the
there,
we
were driving into
great because you'd done loads of laps testing, and you'd won Sebring 6 times or whatever it was. Nice touch.
Yeah, it was, and I was we were driving in for the race that day, and we stopped at the credentials to have our credentials checked, and then there was a big queue, and we're driving along, and then I could see on the bridge into the infield that they got this sign up, and it said, "Thanks for the memories, Ollie." And Helen was in the front seat next to me, and I said, "Do you see that sign?" And she goes, "Yeah." I said, "Do you think it's for me?" And Antonia's like, "Is there any other Ollies racing here this weekend that are retiring after this race?" And I was like, "No, I suppose there's not." And he said, "Of course it's for you. Of course it's for you." And it was a lovely touch, and it's really strange, but not many people choose Sebring as one of their favourite tracks, but I do.
Yeah, I'm fully with you on that. One of my friends actually, Chris Josie's tuned in. Evening, Chris, and he said it's his favourite circuit. It doesn't get enough thumbs up over here.
Well, I think that it's because it's physical, it's bumpy, it's quite aggressive. It's one of those ones where, and it's actually quite flat, but it's actually a massive challenge, and I feel it's one of, if not the only track that you could drive around almost with your eyes shut, because the bumps and the surface changes and the way that you have to use each piece of tarmac and curb and the way that you have to direct the car around the track, it's very driven by those bumps. It's very driven by feel. It's almost like you're driving by braille. You're not really looking. You have to hit all of those points and all of those marks, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's such an amazing track, because it gives you so much feedback. It almost like it's too much at times, and people get overwhelmed with it. And you do when you've raced a GT1 car around there. It's like you've been riding a bucking bronco. It's physical, it's hot, it's tough, it's loud, it's just so aggressive. But you never ever come away from there thinking, well, that wasn't much of a race. You really know you've been in a race, and that's, like I said right at the very start, that's what you want from a race car. You want to have that sort of feel. You want to get those, and that's what flicks the switch for me when you drive. It's the feel that you get, that feedback from the car, and you get a massive amount of that at Sebring. So that's one of the reasons why I love it.
Yeah, fantastic, great stuff. As I said, so much more to talk about, but time's pressing on. So I'm just going to skip straight to these like general kind of fun little questions I ask for everyone at the end, just as a nice little wind down.
Sure.
Quick one: did you have a favourite driver when you were growing up, loving motorsport?
Gilles Villeneuve.
Oh, super choice, good choice.
Yeah.
I won't ask why. That kind of answers itself, doesn't it? I mean, we've obviously
he was my absolute hero, and then sort of replaced by Senna. So
cool. Two great names. Is there anyone that you particularly admire now, just in any series? You just think
who do I think's really, really? I mean, I sit and analyze drivers quite a lot now, and I sort of go through, what's. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard to look past Max. Max is just the absolute, package, and the way he deals with the stress and the press and the pressure and and the ability to deliver. I mean, you don't have to look much past Interlagos last year,
That was
where
unreal, wasn't it?
yeah, I mean, absolutely zero mistakes under horrendous conditions, and he just put everybody in their place.
Yeah.
And you go, well, you can't really argue with that. He absolutely he destroyed everybody. And sometimes you sort of see drivers, take the bull by the horns and really crush the opposition, and that's exactly what he did on that day. And it's hard to look past him. Is he the nicest guy all the time? I don't think so, but he's absolutely straightforward and direct. Not many people like him, I don't think, but he's not the most likable at times, but he absolutely gets it done.
Yeah, I think we'd agree with that. Absolutely right. This is a fun one. Did you have any like rituals that you used to do? Left boot on first, or
Yeah, I did.
the top of the car, anything like that?
Yeah, I used to put my left boot on before my right boot, and my left
That was
glove
a
on before my
complete
right.
guess. I had no idea you were going to say
Yeah,
that.
no, absolutely, it is, and it's strange that you said it, but that's what it is. That's what it was.
How
I
weird.
used to, for a while. I had a thing that I used to do in my balaclava and a visor and this and that. It's like, but the boots and the gloves, that always stayed as it was.
Yeah. That's really weird, because I don't even know why I said that, because normally I've even got it written here. Do you put your right glove on first? So I don't know why I said left boot. Anyway,
There we go.
weird. No, cool. Like that. Was there a series you'd have liked to have tried? Anything like NASCAR, or obviously Formula One would have been good, or like IndyCar, or anything like that, or like British touring cars? Anything you thought might be fun?
I mean, the British touring cars would have been a lot of fun. I think, looking back in the sort of the mid '90s, that was always looked amazing.
Super touring.
But you sort of look at the era just before I got into sports car racing, in the sort of McLarens and that sort of mid '90s as well. That would have been a lot of fun driving those machines, and maybe even sort of in the sort of 962s or the 956s. That they did look monstrous cars to drive, kind of terrifying. But yeah, a lot of fun. But no, I think that I've been very, very lucky in the cars that I've competed in. GT1 I thought was just amazing to compete in and drive in, and the cars just sounded so good. Yeah. And they were so much fun to race and be around others. And like I said, the Pro Drive Aston Martin sort of era was really my sort of favorite, and that was really very, very special.
Yeah, very cool. And that leads us very nice into this next question. Have you got a favorite car that you've ever raced?
The favorite car that I've ever raced was most probably the GT1 C6R. Carbon brakes, mega tires from Michelin, great downforce, huge power, 7-litre. It really was something very, very special to compete in and to drive, and sounded just okay. It was loud, no doubt. Yeah. And at times your ears would be so bruised from all the noise, but God, it just used to sound so brilliant. And every time you fire it up, you go, "God, you knew you were in it." That sort of visceral sort of feel. You'd almost, like I said, like you're around someone like Sebring, it was like you were riding a bucking bronco all the time. You're trying to tame this thing, and that was part of the brilliant thing about it. That you had to do that each time. To get the most from it, you would have to constantly be taming it. So I love that car.
Yeah, fantastic, great stuff. Okay, two more. I've got here. I mean, there's going to be a bit of a list here, but you said you shared the track with some amazing races, as we've sort of touched on. I mean, I'm just going to name a few that you've raced with, against, etc. So like Warren Hughes and Kelvin Burt, Manuel Reuter, Bernd Schneider, Alessandro Nannini, Tony Kanaan, you shared the track with. I didn't realise that. So I looked. Franz Conrad, you mentioned, Alex Wirtz, Dana, Leto, Fisichella, Coulthard, Dalmas, Stuck, Weaver, David Brabham, Darren Turner, Dane Cameron, Helio, Magnussen, Herbert, Baldi, Ronaldo Capello, Andy Wallace, Johansson, Lammers. I mean, even Carl Larson, Sebastian Bourdais, and Pruitt, and Nick Tandy.
Yeah.
Congratulations to him over the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pirro, some Danish bloke called Christiansen.
Yeah.
So many amazing people. I mean, Scott Dixon as well that you shared the track with.
Yeah.
I mean, are there any that stand out just quickly for whatever reason?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that I would have to go sort of back to the guys that I spent time with, and you know, James Weaver and Andy Wallace, just for guys that had a huge amount of motorsport intelligence. You know, they absolutely got racing inside out. You know, everything about how to set a car up, where the performance comes from, how a tire works, how suspension works, what they need to do to get the more out of, whether it's the damping, or whether the tire pressure that they're running, or, you know, is it another sort of half a psi out here or a quarter of a psi out, or am I looking just to tune the damping a little bit more on the bump, or am I looking just to sort of snitch it down just half a mil on the ride height, the front ride height, or, you know, a little bit more packer in this you know, just all of these things that they sit there going over and over and over, and their ability to sort of read a car on the track and then read how a race is going to develop, and then, you know, the conditions that you're racing in. They had it to such a fine art in the United States. It was sort of like that they gave me all of that information for free. Like, as when I first got there, I sort of look at that and I go, God, what an amazing sort of, how generous that was of them just to sort of give me that information. And I was trying to harvest it as much as I possibly could, but what a brilliant amount of training and advice they gave me. And for that, you know, you think, well, they wanted just other British drivers to do well who were coming over to the United States, and you know, they want to sort of take me under their wing and try and sort of educate me and bring me along. So I look at that and I go, in that list, those guys are the ones that had taught me the most. So, you know, I have the most respect for them. And there are lots of other guys there that are clearly very, very good. But there's nobody in that list that I would go on the day, you know, if you're in the car against them, like for like, at their very best, and you are at your very best. There's nobody there that I don't feel like I could beat. And, you know, I'm not saying that in a sort of big-headed way, but I know what I can do and what I can't do. These guys, you know, the likes of Scott Dixon, Seb Bourdais, Nick Tandy. You know, Nick, he came up through racing in mini superstock, I think it was, and he was racing pretty locally to where I was. He actually now lives in the same village as my parents live. Nick went to the same primary school that I went to. He went to the same upper school that I went to. When I started racing in Formula 3, I was asked to go back to my old primary school and do a talk about what I do. And, you know, Formula 3 car, Formula 3 overalls on. So I went back to my primary school, and one of the children in the class was Nick Tandy. Wow. And I gave him one of my posters, and he had it on his wall. And I signed it to Nick, and, you know, and but Nick, as soon as he arrived on the scene, you could tell there was something very special. And I think this was 2015 at Daytona. We start the race, and it's all manic. And, you know, this is GTLM, or I'm trying to think what it was called. I think it was called GTLM back then in 2015. Yeah, it was. And the race starts, and it's Antonio, it's me, and there's a whole group of 4 or 5 of us, and Nick's behind me. And he's bump drafting me all the way out the bus stop, all the way down through NASCAR 3 and 4, and then he comes down to the tri-oval, and I'm all the way down to the apron, and he's tried to then pass me on the apron. And this is on the tri-oval, so the banking, and then it goes flat. So the difference between the two are huge, and he still tried it. And it's like this whole thing of like, well, I don't know if it's going to work until I try it. So he thought, I'll just try it. It didn't work, but that's the sort of guy he is. He's always looking for an opening, a way, an angle, something just to give him a slight advantage. And I then continued to race against him in numerous other races, and went on to win championships. And clearly, he is an unbelievable talent. But you can see in the car when the conditions are difficult and tires are cold and the grip level is lower than everybody wants it to be, he absolutely excels. He has just amazing car control, great reactions, ability to read conditions, ability to get the most performance out of a car. And he's clearly one of the very, very best guys that's ever got behind the wheel in our sport, period. And what he's achieved just on Sunday in winning outright at the Rolex, he is unique. And you absolutely have to respect that. He's a remarkable talent, and somebody that is going to go on and have more success. I'm absolutely sure of that. He's still got many years, and Porsche are extremely lucky to have him.
Yeah, I think that last line actually sums it up absolutely perfectly. Huge, undermentioned in this country, I think. Nick.
Yeah, and I think that now he might well get some further recognition, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely how it should be. No, great stuff. Okay, last question. Just about your kind of career, really. I've got here. You've driven F1 machinery. You've won Le Mans 5 times and Sebring 6 times, and you've won the 24 Hours of Daytona. You've won the Petit Le Mans. Was it four times, I believe? You won championships and everything else. Is there anything? What's the proudest moment for you from within your career, if you have one?
I mean, it is hard to sort of filter it down.
Yeah.
But the win in 2015 at Le Mans was extremely special. Mainly, because of where the team had been and how things had gone through through that week, and we were only running one car. The sister car had a big accident, and the chassis was written off, and so it was all on us. We were sort of one bullet in the gun, and everybody did an amazing job. The team pulling together. It's all the stuff that I've already talked about in Pratt & Miller and Corvette Racing, and how they just were so amazing about pooling all their resources and trying to get the most out of what they've got. And Jordan drove brilliantly, really stepped up, but Tommy was the X factor in the car that year. And I had the pleasure of taking the car over the line and doing the last couple of hours in it. But when I look back on the performance of everybody, it was a real team effort, and you go, yeah, really proud of that one, that we managed to pull everything together as a team from the depths of where we were on like Wednesday evening to being able to come away with a victory against a stacked lineup in GTE Pro. And 15 started a period of GTE Pro where it was just extraordinary, where the amount of entries from so many different manufacturers, whether it was Aston Martin, Porsche, Ferrari, us, you name it. There was BMW were there as well. It just was a star-studded lineup, and to be able to pull that win off in 15, pretty proud of that. Yeah,
absolutely rightly so. And obviously the last one at Le Mans for you guys as well, and for the team, which is superb. Right, I think that's a perfect place on which we can end. I'll just a comment from earlier on from Tash Stratton, and she has said that this has been one of the most interesting interviews that she's seen. So that's lovely. Thank you very much for that. And I would fully concur with that. Firstly, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. All the comments are still over 200 of you tuning in, which is lovely. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the comments and the support and everything. But of course, biggest thanks to you, Oliver. Thank you so much for coming on. I've absolutely loved hearing about your your story could have gone another 3 hours if we had my way.
Yeah.
But it's been brilliant. I really appreciate you coming on again, especially so soon after you've been out in Daytona. So
No
thank you
problem.
very much.
Pleasure.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll be announcing another chat tomorrow. But in the meantime, stay safe, have fun with whatever you're doing, and we will see you all very, very soon. And thanks a lot again, Oliver. Appreciate it.
Bye bye.
Cheers, guys.